ahead.
I hereby call to order this committee the whole meeting. It is Monday, September 14th, 2020, and the time is 8:13 a.m. Will the clerk please call the roll? Here.
Here. Here.
Here.
Here.
Here. Here. We wish to acknowledge that we've been experiencing some sound issues at the recent meetings, and we ask for your patience as we problem solve to work through these challenges. We respect the desire for both in-person attendance and remote participation at our meetings simultaneously. For today's committee of the whole meeting, we're trying a few new approaches. If this approach does not address the issues, we'll consider alternatives for the September board meeting. We remind everybody at the table to speak up and into the microphones. The red light on your microphone should be lit when you're speaking. And apologies for the late start this morning. That was also due to trying to get the sound correctly. Thank you. With that being said, we'll start the meeting. I seek a motion to approve the August 17th, 2020 Committee of the Whole and Executive Session minutes.
I move to approve the August 17, 2020 Committee of the Whole and Executive Committee minutes.
May I have a second?
Second.
The motion having been made and seconded, board members, are there any comments, errors, or omissions to the minutes? Okay. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Here.
Aye.
Oh. Aye. Sorry. Yes.
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 Yes. Yes. Yes. Motion carries. We'll begin with the Facilities Development Committee. I turn the meeting over to FDC Chair Ellen Sternweiler.
Hello. I believe I am going to turn this right over to, hold on one second, sorry. Apologize, my papers were out of order. We were gonna discuss the Ramona and Mackenzie and Keep 39 projects this morning. Sorry, it took me a second. I got 3 versions. We're gonna have Mr. Papanopoulos.
Yes.
Yeah, I wasn't sure who was reporting on
Yes.
this morning.
So we are giving the board an update today regarding the Ramona and Mackenzie Keep 39 projects. As the board will remember, that is currently scheduled for the possible implementation in the upcoming summer, the summer of 2021. We won't need an official board decision until January or February, but as the board has directed us, we've continued to move along in evaluating the project, its feasibility, as well as the associated costs for the project. And so Corey and our principals have worked diligently with our architect team and our all of the people who work behind the scenes to make construction projects work really well. Joe, thank you for being here as well. So we have Joe and Sandra and Colby here with us. Corey, any introduction that you want to make before we ask for an update from them directly?
No, Colby's going to handle the presentation and walking through the design at this point. So turn it over to Colby.
Oh, okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much.
Just a second, Colby, we're not hearing you.
Oh, I'm unmuted.
Let's see if we can correct that sound.
So I am unmuted. Tell me, I'm just going to kind of ramble on until you can hear me. Any sound yet? Nothing? Okay. So I don't really have a repertoire of songs I can sing. I'm not very good at that. So
Oh, sorry, John.
can you hear me now, Tony? Any sound?
Let me try again.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
I know, because it has to be.
Oh, so Joe, can you hear me too?
I can hear you.
Yeah, okay. People with headsets.
Colby, can you try saying something, please?
Okay, I'm saying something. Can you hear me, Tony?
Well,
No?
I agree in the background.
I know Sandra and Joe can hear me. They were talking about calling in or something.
Colby, try again.
Yep. Can you hear me, Tony?
Oh,
Yeah.
that's wonderful.
Yeah, we
Colby.
can.
Oh,
Go
you
ahead.
can. All right, great. So the next thing is you probably have to activate my screen sharing, if that's possible. I am still disabled.
Challenges of a hybrid environment.
Yeah, the hybrid is,
Yeah, I've never done share screening on Zoom. I've done it on Google Meet before, so this is a little bit of a challenge for me too. Okay, it's still disabled.
hold on.
So members of the board, once Colby is able to share, you'll be able to see what he's sharing both on the screen as well as up on the projection.
We hope,
There
Carrie.
it is, right? Oh, right there.
Share host is disabled, attendee screen sharing.
Colby, try now. I had the help from one Katie Lee.
Aha, there we go. So let's see. How is that, everyone? Can you see a picture
Yes.
of Mackenzie?
Yep. Yes, we can.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right. So this is the second phase of the kindergarten enrichment. So we've been working with the principals and Corey and Carrie to define their needs, both current and kind of projected needs. So I'm going to kind of run through Mackenzie and Ramona, which are the two schools that we're addressing, and then kind of a little timeline, and then pass it over to Joe for a budget update. So what we're looking at, this is an aerial view of Mackenzie. So there's two parts of this. We really have to add two kindergarten classrooms. At Mackenzie, we're not directly doing that because down here is the kindergarten wing, and we kind of want to concentrate all the kindergartners here. So we're trying to do a little shuffling at this school. So we're adding 3 classrooms to the back near the playground area. That's that area there. They are adjacent to, this is the large gym and the small gym, so kind of tucked in the corner in the back of the building. So we're adding a 1-story building there. So I'm going to kind of scroll up. So there's a couple of other goals that we're doing there. So so the kindergarten rooms, we're trying to convert what was once a kindergarten room here into a kindergarten, and then convert a typical classroom into also a kindergarten. And then by doing that, we're moving those classes to this addition back here in the back of the building. One of the other things that we're trying to do is to take the cafeteria and expand that this way. So to do that, we're going to move what was a converted classroom. This used to be cafeteria. We're going to kind of move that back into this addition. So this project, and then renovate to get access from the main corridor this way into the new addition. We're going to renovate the existing offices in 105 to kind of convert those. So so this project actually will net 2 new classrooms because this one up here is getting relocated. So there's about a 5,000 square foot addition and about a little over 5,000 square feet of renovation area in this project. So then Ramona, I believe, so I don't know if Dana is there or not, but she's kind of done her projections, and so this should meet both the current and forecasted needs for the area, for the school. At Ramona, again, so here's Ramona Road. The front of the building is here. So this is the addition that we did a few years ago. So the thought is now is to just kind of extend northward with a new addition there to add the kindergarten space. Also, there is the thought of right at the main entry here, which is the main entry, is to add some sorely needed meeting space. I'm going to kind of back up and go down to what that looks like. So this is the current kindergarten area. So we're going to take those rooms and we're going to make 1, 2, 3, and add a 4th kindergarten room here, and do some reshuffling with the special education environment and the early childhood. And so create a kindergarten area here, and this is kind of like the early learning. And then this is the new conference and meeting space that's adjacent to the front of the building. So it's got lots of easy access for various uses. So, all right. So because we've done recent renovations at Ramona, or did this addition that right here, we did this addition, we had asked Corey to kind of get going really right away on the planning of this. So that's because there's probably a significant amount of permitting time that's required to work with the village and possible stormwater issues. So we've started that whole process right now. We're starting to do our zoning analysis, planning to meet with the village, and doing our pre-construction planning with surveys and soil analysis. And so right now, this is what we're looking at the timeline being. So we're here, we're looking at bidding in January here, and then as Carrie said, this is when you guys would have to come back and make a decision about whether to go ahead or not. So so that's the kind of overall view. So let's see. So would we like to talk about, Carrie, would we like to go into the budget portion?
Yes, I think that's a great idea.
Okay, all right. I will put this back on the screen, and maybe Joe, you can address what you've come up with for this.
Sure. So we're at the stage now where we established sort of the baseline preliminary budget analysis. So we've done that for both Ramona and Mackenzie, purely based on current design criteria. As the design progresses, we'll get more into detailed budgeting. But for right now, Mackenzie, we have a baseline budget of $4,566,341. We still do show an ad alternate of approximately $250,000 for the toilet room at this point. Whether that gets rolled into the base bid, that's TBD. So I just think we should vet out more of the pros and cons with regards to that. With regards to Ramona, we have a preliminary baseline budget of $2,941,552. Similar structure as Mackenzie, just in the fact that we have a base bid. We do not have an ad alternate at this point for Ramona. Moving forward, again, we're going to do our check and balances from now till bid issuance, which right now it's tentatively for January. So we'll have 3, maybe 4 more rounds of budget checks from now till then, ultimately leading to a final control estimate, which we will bring for kind of final review and approval. So that's where we're at with regards to budgeting. As far as construction phase, I know Kobe didn't touch base on this. We do have a couple of options. It really stems from the deliverable. So if we want this delivered in August, we would need a late March spring break start, late spring start, with that substantial taking place in time for August. If there's some flexibility in that, we can start in June with a deliverable in December. We've done both in the past for different projects. There's pros and cons to both. So that's just something that we don't have to make a decision right now, but at some point in the near future, we should get a feel for what we anticipate with that.
All right. So are there any questions?
Thank you, Colby.
Oh. All right, so I will stop sharing.
Oh, can you hear me, Colby?
I can hear you now.
So $8 million between the two projects. Is there a $4 million version for these two projects?
No,
Or
there's
it
not a
has to be
not a
eight?
$4 million version. That probably would mean only doing one project one summer and holding the other for the subsequent summer. As I understand it, and Colby and Joe, you can jump in if there's something more you can share. Once we open up the building and start to make the additions, we want to make sure that we are approaching as many of the needs as we can, and doing that together leads to efficiency in budgeting. And so if we're going to do the project, there may be some small ways to reduce costs of the project, but not to go from 8 million down to 4 million. That would be no longer a substantial enough project to make it worth it.
So if,
Yeah.
this is it. I'll ask one more. So if you were to prioritize, what would that look like from an administration perspective?
Prioritizing one school over the other,
Yes.
we would have to have some further conversations about that.
Mark?
Can I ask the complementary question, which is, are there anti-synergies of splitting them up at all?
Oh, that would be a good question for Joe or Colby. If we split the projects into 2 different summers, are there costs that would increase as a result of that division?
Joe, I'm going to let you handle that one.
It would, for an updated budget analysis, I would just assume for the latter project that we put in a 3 to 4% placeholder for escalation. Now, the numbers we're looking at this stage, they're on the conservative side, and these get whittled down as the design progresses. And as we kind of work our way through some of the authorities having jurisdiction reviews, such as MWRD. So we like to kind of keep these placeholders on the conservative side, just until we start changing some assumptions to facts. But to answer your question, the short answer is the latter project, I think it would be wise to include that 4% escalation increase at this point. So. but market changes, market could get better. There's lots of variables that we may see something that's just status quo.
Yep. And on a point, just on pure percentages, obviously, if you spend more money now, there's less escalation later. So the Mackenzie project, because it has more renovation, is a slightly larger addition, costs more. So the escalation on Ramona would be less than the escalation on Mackenzie, just from a dollar point of view. Yeah.
Okay. But just to be clear, there's no dis-synergies from splitting the projects up. There's a penalty for waiting for any project.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think there, I think within each project, they should be done as a whole, because once you do the addition, you've got to do the entire addition. And then because of some of the reshuffling that's going on, especially with Mackenzie, because you're taking the cafeteria, classroom, and moving it into the addition and things, you kind of have to do everything all together because it's a big reshuffling project. Ramona, a little less that, but.
Mark, and I would say if we were looking at smaller scopes where we would manage the on-site activities with one supervisor, and all of a sudden we're splitting it up into 2 separate construction phases over 2 separate summers, then we would be doubling that on-site supervision. But the fact that these are substantial enough scopes to warrant a full-time supervisor for each, independent of each other, that washes itself out.
Got it. That's what I was asking. Thank you very much, Chair.
Frank?
On the, so it makes sense, and we've talked before about continuing to do some of the background work, but does, in particular, the permitting, does that age? I mean, if we do the background work and I know there's certain amounts of surveys that probably last for a while, but what's the timeframes that work would still be valid?
I don't think we actually have to we can do all the preliminary work, I believe, on the, with the village, et cetera. And maybe just pull the permit when we decide to actually go ahead. The one caveat of that is if they change the legislation in between, then maybe something has to change with that. But I think we can do all the groundwork ahead of time. I don't see a problem.
And just from an internal budget standpoint, from a calendar standpoint, does that doing the construction starting in June, does that separate the money for which fiscal years it shows up in any differently?
Sorry.
So the budget that we passed last month has very closely to these amounts. And the way we had budgeted, we estimated 2/3 of the project, that was assuming a March start date, would be 2/3 of it would be in fiscal year 21, and then the last third would be the following. But if it's June, given that our school calendar runs well into June, you're probably only looking at, I don't know, 15 or 20% maybe of being able to be done by June. So then bulk of it would hit fiscal year 22.
And somewhere down the line, then we'd also have to look at the opportunity lost, that if we start in December, it probably limits or eliminates the opportunity to do a KEEP program.
That's right. There would be an impact for sure.
Right.
Amy? Amy, I think you had a question.
It may be helpful just to hear a tiny bit about the need for the bigger cafeteria and the office space, just to understand what we're discussing in addition to KEEP.
Absolutely. Thank
And
you.
also just related, I wasn't sure if the office space at Ramona is new or if that piece by the main entry is a renovation.
It's a reconfiguration, but it is adding additional space as well. And we are fortunate enough to have both of our school principals here with us today, who I know would be eager to share a bit more information regarding the needs at their schools in particular. We've spent quite a bit of time really looking into the needs. Maybe, Kristen, can you just pull one of those chairs around so Dana can sit down and, oh, thanks.
All right, am I good, Tony? To start with the cafeteria at Mackenzie, right now the cafeteria only fits one grade level at a time. So our lunches span across several hours and we're not able to get 2 grade levels. So in order to condense our lunch times and be able to fit kindergarteners in the cafeteria at any point, expanding the cafeteria would then allow us to have 2 grade levels at a time. And our lunches would be able to be between that like 11 to 12:31 time. Where now if we were to schedule it out in order to schedule all the grade levels, lunch would have to start as early as 10:15 or possibly go as late as like 1:45 when we've played around with different scenarios. So that's kind of the cafeteria perspective. And in order to get that one classroom back from the cafeteria, that would be one of the classrooms that would be part of the new addition. And then the office spaces that we would be creating would be similar office spaces to what we have now that we would be reconfiguring and then adding a few for some of our small group spaces that would allow our occupational therapists to have a space as well as our differentiated support teacher. So that would be adding 2 office spaces that we currently don't have.
Helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Makes a lot of sense.
Well, Dana is at the microphone. Are there other questions regarding Mackenzie, or can we move on to Cindy, who's here to represent Ramona?
I just had a quick follow-up. That extra classroom, that really was removed from the cafeteria originally, right? So, I mean, we did that in order to gain classroom space, but originally the concept and the background was that whole area was cafeteria.
Yes, the whole area. So as a matter of fact, the floor is still, you could very clearly see that that classroom used to be cafeteria. So yes, I think at one point it was used to get another classroom and the cafeteria was made smaller.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cindy, can you tell us a little more about some of the spaces outside of the kindergarten classrooms that we're looking at Ramona?
Sure. So Ramona has the early childhood program. And when we built on that, we also brought over a lot of specialists and people who pulled out the students to do work. And we also have a lot more parent meetings. So we only have 1 conference room in Ramona, and we often have 2 or 3 groups meeting for IEP meetings. We've made it work. We give up, my office is used on a daily basis for those kind of meetings and other spaces, but we'd really like to have a room that is set for conferences. The other thing that's a problem at Ramona is small group work. So if you come down that EC kindergarten hallway on any day, there are kids working in the hall with specialists. So a speech path in the corner, a reading specialist in the corner, our PT and OT doing work with the students. And it's not really ideal to have them in the hall. So we'd love to have some small group work for them.
Questions for Cindy?
Sure.
Are there any more questions? Mark?
Just a semi-related question, but we can go into this if there's a better part of the meeting for this. But the Keep 39 this year, what's the effect of remote learning been on, the enrollment we expected to see, the reimbursements that we effectively expected to see, et cetera?
Yeah, I would say it's been pretty significant. We will have an update on enrollment for the board at the board's meeting next Monday. But what we saw is there was some decline in enrollment or expected enrollment as a result of the pandemic and families making the choice to keep their child home for the enhanced fully remote program, which then is not connected with Keep 39. And then when we made some calendar adjustments on August 13th, that extended the remote learning at the beginning of the school year, we saw some additional families choose not to engage in Keep 39 at that point. And so We have seen some decline in enrollment, which has a related decline then in funding for the program. We've continued to staff the program, and we know that there are many families who are really eager to see that fully implemented this school year. And it's actually one of the things that the metrics reopening advisory team spent some time talking about, getting our kindergarten and first graders on with even greater regularity as quickly as possible.
I just had one other thing on that. I mean, yes, some people did drop off, but before we had kind of released our plan, I think at Central, we actually had a little bit of a wait list. And at Harper, we were right up against like the full max. So I think, given at least at those two buildings, like had there not been a pandemic, it would have been a very popular program.
Thank you. That is entirely accurate. We had really strong interest and enrollment in the program until the pandemic kind of shifted things for families and for us as well.
Okay, well, if there are no more questions on that, well, we've already discussed.
Just one comment. Colby and Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, but do we need direction on whether or not to further follow that down some of the design path from STR's perspective?
Yeah, we would, in order to meet those schedules, especially the early, the March start, we would need to start designing in earnest, now, in order to bid in January. So we would be looking to, not only start working with the village and the NWRD, but also to start, developing the design to the next phase and moving toward construction documents.
And so, board, our plan, as you've advised, is to continue to move forward until that decision time is absent, of course, further direction from you. So if you tell us today that we need to slow down or halt that design process, we certainly would yield to your direction, but otherwise we are proceeding. And again, the project will not go forward until January or February when we go out to bid and the board formally accepts that. So is there direction otherwise, or?
Ask one thing in addition. Is there, so 8 million, let's say we, say, yeah, let's go do it. Are there consequences that because we're basically signaling to the world that we're willing to invest, $8 million in a recession, and this community really, really, really cares about developing buildings and making sure we have the facilities. I mean, have we thought through, could we end up with more students and be back in a couple of years talking about opening these buildings again, for another, X millions for another classroom? And I wonder, is it, what was cut to get to the 8 million? You know what I'm saying? Like, would another million get us another 2 classrooms or things like that would otherwise be necessary a couple of years down the road that we could deal with, while we're dealing with relatively large projects?
So the first part of your question is regarding projections of enrollment. And right now our enrollment projections do not forecast significant increases in enrollment. Now that said, we are living amidst a pandemic, and it is difficult to know how families will move and relocate in the middle of these circumstances. We have already seen some families enroll right here at the beginning of the school, and we're really proud to be able to offer a hybrid in-person model, and I think that is attractive to many families. But the current situation, let's hope, does not last indefinitely. And so as it stands right now, enrollment projections are not forecasted to grow to need additional classroom space. That said, we are kind of trying to balance the budgetary constraints that we have with the ever-present need of additional classroom space. And so at this point, we think this is the best balance we can come up with. It would be difficult to justify spending additional dollars right now for additional classrooms that we don't currently have a forecasted need, for which we don't have a forecasted need. But it's always a question to be asking and to really be closely monitoring. Right now, this is the best recommendation we can make based on the information that we have available to us.
Lisa?
I just wanted to answer your question, which is, I think the question on the table is, do we want to slow down or stop the scoping of the project? And I think we have 5 months until we have to decide yes or no. So my belief is that we should continue down this road because we don't know what's 5 months in COVID land is a lot of time. Does anybody disagree?
No. Right?
I just wanted to follow up either as a comment or a question, either way it turns out, to John's point. With the kindergarten, I mean, this sets up everybody to have 4 classrooms, but historically we've had morning and afternoon. So we do have the flexibility that if we had to add a 5th kindergarten class, and we have to have 1 half-day option, I think by law anyway. So that always means 1 classroom. So, I mean, I think there's some flexibility that we've built in, plus with the learning commons, we have rooms. So we have the building plan that we've been working on for the last 6, 7, 8 years already builds in at least a little bit of classroom expansion.
Yes, there is some flexibility there, and certainly if there were 5 sections of kindergarten needed at a school, what would likely happen is there would be 3 sections of kindergarten with Keep 39, and then 2 that would be a morning and an afternoon academic kindergarten only. And so then we would have to make some decisions about how we're allocating those 3 sections of Keep 39, but I think there's some reasonable ways to accomplish that.
And then with the learning common, I mean, the whole concept of that is that there's, you know, it has ebbs and flows of population, there's some flexibility. So I think we've been building that into our plans over the years.
That's right. And as we've seen this year with the unforeseen circumstances of needing substantially more space, but using that space differently amid the pandemic, we certainly have made good use of the learning commons space. Sometimes we get that question of where are you finding all this space to offer smaller class sizes of in-person instruction? And in some of our schools, it is looking at the creative use of those additional spaces that were designed exactly for that purpose of being able to be converted into more traditional classroom spaces.
Not exactly this purpose.
Not this
Yeah.
purpose, the flexibility of
Right.
classroom space
I
purposes.
understand.
Absolutely.
Are we all done with the discussion on this? I think we're going to move on to the summer projects wrap up.
Yes, and I'll let Corey take this over, and I think Colby and Joe will have an update there as well.
Yeah, I could jump in. Just a quick little update. So Highcrest, Harper, Central, we're just wrapping up a few punch items. Besides that, the main focus is just closeout, obtaining all the warranties and as-built and all the different closeout documents that we collect on each project. So that's the big focus right now. With regards to budgeting on those 3, we have unused allowance value, which is great. So everything wrapped up fairly well, and we have unused allowance value at the end of it. So all in all, it was another successful summer. Big effort from everyone. So it's a good update.
So Joe, you forgot to say on time and under budget.
Well, I figured everyone was sick of hearing that.
Yeah.
No, we never sick of hearing that.
Never get sick of that.
Yeah.
Great job, you guys. Really terrific job. Thank you.
So we still have Steve Hacker. You may have met him over the last number of months. He's still there full time, just making sure that we finish off on the right note. We don't want to leave premature and have have loose ends out there, so he will stay out there and work with the different buildings just to make sure we finish on a good note.
Okay.
Thank you, Joe.
The parking lot finished?
That is the next update.
The next
Oh,
update.
oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Ah, sorry.
I will just add, at some point, we would love to host the board for a tour of our new spaces. Right now, we are obviously limiting visitors to our schools, but the spaces are amazing and already put to really, really good use. So it's nice to see that. And the additional space could not have come at a better time so that we could open our schools. So thank you, board and community as well, for your support of that.
I think that was it for Joe and Sandra and Colby, right? The next is the village stuff.
Yes, and really just a couple of updates. Obviously, the stormwater project behind Highcrest is wrapping up. We do have limited field space available to us. That field that is behind Highcrest, as the board is aware, is property that belongs to the Park District. It's very important to them to see that property, and so it's fenced off from our use, but we do have access along the side and along the fields closer to WJHS. We did experience a bit of a challenge late last week with a sewer line out of Highcrest, and to not get too in depth, it caused us to have to close some of our bathrooms. And as everyone is aware, right now bathroom schedules and access and social distancing is complicated when you have access to all of your facilities. When some of them have to close or be reduced in use, it becomes really, really, really difficult. And so thankfully, the village and our Highcrest team jumped into action really quickly. And we're very thankful that the village sent a team to work over the weekend to resolve the issue so that today the bathrooms are up and operating. Again, we are using every aspect of our buildings right now, including our bathrooms, and need to be able to do so in order to open in-person schooling. So that has been resolved as we understand it this morning. There was some disruption to the parking lot as a result, and so that will need to be restored now over the next couple of weeks before that final layer goes on top. But it's fully operational as I understand it this morning, so we're really thankful for their support. The other element of a project that is going on is Central Avenue construction. As the board will remember, that was intended to have been a big project over the summer. It got delayed for some funding reasons at the village level, which actually was at the state level. And then they initiated right in August as we're trying to open in-person schooling too. So that caused a little bit of complications. But I will tell you, I was at Central as school started, and we welcomed our in-person learners, and parents and students along with staff seemed to be able to navigate the road construction well enough when we're at the smaller in-person enrollment. So right now we're at about 25% of our expected enrollment with 1 day per week, last week and this week. That will continue to increase as is laid out in our Wilmette weeks. We did have an issue there, experienced an issue there last week as well, where somehow the water got cut off to Central School. Again, hand washing is of critical importance to us right now amid this pandemic, especially around lunchtime, where we have sanitizer all over the place, but really hand washing is recommended prior to lunch and prior to eating. And so it caused a little bit of disruption, but we got through it and it has been resolved, and we're moving right along. But yeah, if it's not one thing, it's another as we attempt to open our schools. And so many, many thanks to the village for their partnership, but equally, if not more so, to our administrators and our staff, our teachers in the building, for being ever flexible and willing to problem solve, even amid some of the frustration that occurs when the unexpected happens. So, yes.
You have a question? I also had a question. Do we know when that's scheduled to be finished? I'm just thinking if more kids come and the weather gets worse and people are driving more.
The Central Avenue project is not scheduled to finish this school year.
Okay.
There will be a pause in the winter months. And so we're hoping that helps us some as we're bringing the students back. But again, as I stood in the front of Central School for 2 days, it really, the village did a really nice job of stopping work to welcome students and families to campus. And then they work a little during school hours and then stop again at dismissal. So we're doing the best we can to navigate, and the village is being as helpful as they can amid, again, the huge road construction project that they are leading. Mark?
The question I was gonna ask is, sorry, did I cut you off?
No.
Okay. I have not seen the field, where the water project is. Have you seen the field?
Mhm.
How did it come out with the manholes? Does it seem like a safe situation?
I think so.
Yeah.
To be honest, I haven't paid super close attention to the manholes within the fenced-in area.
Yeah,
But
I
it looks
just
like it
haven't
was
looked at it.
targeted in their installation to be safe. Mark?
So if you go along the sidewalk, about, I would say, a third of the way from the west end to the east end, you'll see a manhole on the right-hand side that's, maybe 10 feet inside the fence. And you can see what they did and what it looks like. The one thing I didn't see on there was a specific lock, but I wasn't looking closely for one, so maybe I missed it. My understanding is that we're going to lock those manholes down, but I might be wrong. But anyway, if you want to see it, you can actually go and just
walk
look
over
at the
there.
manhole.
Yeah, thanks.
I did have a question, which is there anything, when we think about when Central pauses, the Central Street work pauses, maybe it's worth us thinking through how, do we have a preference for how the sort of over the winter traffic pattern would look? And do we have any ability to express an opinion to the village on what would make life easier for us for those months when they're not doing anything and we're still using it?
We are, as schools, we like routine. And so we build out routine, and we sometimes just want to stick to routine, especially in the current experiences. So, but it is something worth looking into. So I'll ask Becky to think about
And
that.
you may have nothing to that's fine. Seems like an opportunity.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Back over to President Fade.
Thank you. Next, we have school finance committee items. I turn the meeting over to SFC Chair John Cesaretti.
Thank you, President Babes. Bye, guys.
Oh, bye,
Oh,
Kobe.
thank
Bye,
you.
Sandra.
Thank you.
Bye, Joe.
Bye,
Thanks so
Sandra.
much.
Bye, Joe. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, cash flow review, which we asked for and received, and I think we're gonna go through next.
Sure.
I should turn it over, I think, to Corey.
Sure. So, like you said, as at the request of the board, we wanted to just take a quick look at cash and investment balances. So what we have here in the document that was provided to the board is the amounts for the 1920 school year were the actual amounts, and then the amounts for the current fiscal year are projected based upon our cash flow work with PMA. And what you'll note is, August has historically been our high point at about 63 million. And then usually near the end of January and the very beginning of the February, before that spring installment of property taxes comes in, is our low point at about $37, $38 million. I think the one nice thing about where we're at as a district is, even at our low point, we're still looking at, solidly 6 months of cash reserves. And that's assuming that, a typical month where we just, we're paying some accounts payable and doing two payrolls, we're looking at, about $5.5 million a month in cash outflows. So, from that perspective, I feel, really good where we're at. The one thing that, at least from my perspective, looking at something like this is that you can kind of immediately rule out like any need for short-term borrowings, which is always nice. So, and is there any questions?
Oh, go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, there's some ebb and flows in the cash flows, et cetera, but it really looks like spring of 2021, the numbers drop. Is that because of the capital projects or?
Yes. Yeah. Yep,
And-
absolutely. If you were to look at our overall, budget, and as it relates to like operating fund balance, you know, incorporating, the budget incorporates, doing the projects as have previously been discussed. So yeah, as we get to the end of fiscal year 21, you start to see some large outlays for the capital projects.
So is it representative? I mean, it looks like year over year, the cash reserves dropped by 10 million. Is that a short-term issue, or is that the new normal then, or the new baseline for the years following?
Well, so at the end of, you're correct. It is about $10 million reduction in cash, which is, attributable to the construction projects that we're wrapping up this summer, and then we'd be working on, next spring and summer, potentially. So yeah, that would be the new, kind of a new baseline, once those projects would be completed.
Those dollars were earmarked for those construction projects, that's the ones that went down then.
Right, it goes back to the 6 months of cash on hand. If we started the next year, the July of 2021 year, with 40 million instead of 54 million, then does that imply that somewhere during that next school year that we would probably drop below the 6 months?
That be, Corey, only if we were pursuing additional construction projects thereafter and spending down those dollars even further. Am I saying that correct, Corey? Maybe you can add some.
No, I mean, if you were kind of to project that out with our current, assuming that anything after like 2021 was, completely balanced budget, your low point, certainly there would be probably points during the year where you would drop below 6 months. It'd probably be in that January or December through early February timeframe.
When is the next time we would see a 5-year budget projection? When's that scheduled in our cycle?
Yeah, I think we usually do that in November or December, Corey.
Yeah, I was looking through that. It was either November or December, kind of depended. Usually the 5-year projection gets updated, incorporated once we've, the district has received like the presentation of the financial statements from the auditors, and we kind of incorporated all that at similar times.
Yeah, we have some decisions we have to make. So November would be much better than December this year. I mean, some years it's kind of background, but this year it actually impacts our decisions, I think.
Understood, and we certainly will try to do that in November. Unfortunately, we do have so many moving parts to our budget that we don't want to do it so early that it's not a fair representation of what 5 years out might look like. So we'll do our best to do that in November if possible.
Frank, any other questions? Appreciate you putting this together. I think it's important to all of us. And I would encourage the administration to keep moving it forward, because I think it's very helpful to see. So thank you. The next item is the financial profile score sensitivity, which we asked for, appreciate seeing. It's, I think, quite reassuring. Maybe you should go through it.
Sure. Sure. So the next document that was in the board's packet was just a kind of a summary of what makes up the ISBE's financial profile score. At the very top, you see the actual scores that you need to get in each category. The District 39 has been in the financial recognition category for a very long time. I know when I looked at it a month or two ago, I think it was well over a decade. And that will continue to be a goal. And then the next section has the financial profile indicators. So the calculation of it is there's 5 different category or indicators. Fund balance to revenue ratio is 35%, with the need to be at least 25% for that category. Expenditures to revenue ratio is 35% as well. needs to be a ratio of $1 or less for the highest category. Days cash on hand is 10%. You would need 180 days cash on hand for the highest category. And then the bottom two are related to borrowings. There's a 10% for percentage of short-term borrowing, and then there's 10% of the long-term borrowing. And both of those you would need to be at 75% for the highest category. One thing to kind of keep in mind, if you go to ISB's website and under their school finance section, it shows each year how many districts fall into each of these categories. Now that we have evidence-based funding and everybody's slotted into a tier, they even break it down by tier. There's about 83%. So there's like I think it's 851 districts on there on that particular section of ISB's website. And there's about 83% of the districts fall into the financial recognition or the highest category. So then, when I kind of looked at, how does the fiscal year 21 budget, impact this potential score? If the budget were to come in exactly as budgeted, instead of getting an exact 4.0 score for fiscal year 21, the district would still retain financial recognition, but the category that would likely drop down a little to the second highest category would be the expenditure to revenue ratio, where expenditures would be slightly higher than the revenue. And that would, that particular indicator is done on a yearly basis. So if you expend more than you brought in one given year, it doesn't impact the following year, unlike maybe the days cash on hand or the fund balance to revenue ratios. So then I took an additional step and looked even further of, what would really have to happen for District 39 to fall out of that top financial recognition category and slip to financial review. And it would really take a combination of revenues being under budget by about 2.0 million and expenditures to be over budget by 1.75 million. Both of those things would have to occur for the district to fall down a spot. Given where we're at, that feels, like extremely unlikely to happen. So, as far as maintaining, I guess, back to the ultimate question of the board from last month, I fully expect the district to stay in financial recognition for another year. So, is there any questions about any of it?
Yeah, go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, I had two clarifications. On the days of cash on hand, I think we talked about this before, that they look at the year end, so not that it dips down in the middle.
Yep.
So that gives us a little bit of flexibility. And then on the scenario that projected or sensitivity analysis, I guess, that you did, which is really good, that 2 million fall in budget or revenue, that's the current budget already assumes that we're going to run some deficit because of the extra spending. So that would be 2 million in addition to that. Correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. All right. Good. Then that is a safety margin. Thank you.
Yeah.
I had a question. If one were wanting to look up, what exactly our numbers are for each of the metrics, where does one find that?
So each year when we finish, or on our website, if you go into the business section, there's a link for like our different financial reports. And if you clicked on the one that says annual financial report, if you go, and you pull up that PDF, if you go in about 5 pages, there should be a tab for financial profile score calculation. It'll have each of those 5 indicators, and then it'll, on that page, what it also does is, if someone really wanted to dig into the details of how it's calculated, it shows what cells on what tabs further back in that. And if you ever opened up the state's Excel document, it's massive. It would tell you exactly what numbers go in there, so you can see where we're at.
I really like this report. I mean, if we could dig that up and put it in this report, where exactly we are with the metrics, I think that'd be useful information.
Okay.
Curious about others' thoughts. Looks like, yes. Yeah. Agreement. Thank you, Corey. That was very helpful. All right. Shall we move on? Ready? Okay. So student activity funds.
So
I think you're going to talk about that more.
Yep.
Yep.
So for this agenda item, there isn't anything, there's no handout or attachment. I really just wanted to remind everybody that we had previously discussed, with the change in the budgeting, and then kind of looking back, we realized that the board had never really been given what we were writing checks for student activity out of. I did ask, with many of the things that show up on our agenda at the board meeting level, there are some items where the board actually votes in the consent calendar or the consent agenda section. And there's some items that are more informational. So I did check with legal counsel to see whether they felt like, since we're adding this, because the regular checks that the district does, the board votes each month. And Steve said that he felt like the board did not need to vote on those. So, our practice, I think, here in the past has been if something doesn't require a board vote, we put it more in the informational. So assuming that everyone feels that okay with that, then I would expect that next week we will, whatever checks we have written out of student activity since July through basically today or tomorrow, will show up as an informational item in the board packet.
Yeah, I think that's fine, right? I believe the idea is visibility, right? So
Yep.
So we have it. Okay. Thank you. Any other thoughts on that?
I think it's great.
All right. The auditor planning letter, which
Yeah.
I thought was particularly interesting.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
would you like to talk about it?
Sure. Yeah, as it implies, it is entirely their document. I am merely the means to pass it along to each of the board members. The idea of the planning letter is really for the auditors to reach out to each of the board members and start a dialogue between the board and the audit firm, if any of the board members so choose. So feel free to review that at your leisure. And if you have any questions, I would suggest reaching out to Nick. He's the partner.
Okay, so I'll do this unless anybody else wants to. So I think we really would like to have the partner present the financials to us. That's good. And I would suggest that they go into fairly good specifics about the testing that they did and what exactly they do. Because I don't think it's general knowledge, what auditors really are there for, right, and what they do. And it might be helpful just to the public and to the board for them to go into,
Sure,
what we're getting with the audited financials. Great. So have you been satisfied with the level of service that we're getting?
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing, I think, compared to all my prior years of dealing with this, we never actually, at least I haven't seen that, like they did it remotely. So, and, with all the other planning stuff going on, Jane, our controller, handled almost the vast majority of working with them and going back and forth, and some of the other staff in the business office. So, but yeah, everything's been fine. I have no reason to believe that we won't, get our financial statements on time as we would have in prior years. So.
All right, I see none. I will turn this meeting back to President Thames.
Thank you. I just want to take temperature of the room. Do we need a 5-minute break or do we want to plow through?
Great idea.
I need a 5-minute break.
Yeah, love that idea. Go ahead. We're back recording.
Oh, great. Next, we have the strategy committee. I turn the meeting over to strategy chair, Mark Steen.
And I turn it over to Dr. Kramascoli.
Well, thank you. We do not have any real strategy committee items to update per se, but I am eager to provide the board and the community with an update on our reopening plan and specifically the metrics reopening advisory team. So our metrics reopening advisory team has met twice, and in those 2 short meetings, an hour apiece, they have accomplished quite a bit of work. I am eager to share with the board this morning the dashboard that has been developed and the metrics related to the dashboard. And so I will walk the board through this, and then our community will get an email this afternoon with an introduction to what is live on our metrics dashboard, as well as the recommendations from the team from last Friday's meeting. So let me see if I can share. I wonder, Tony, if you have to let me.
No, should be.
I am already sharing. Okay, so can everyone's, oh, you can, look at that, all righty. Okay, so as we look at the main page, you will see on the sidebar, there are 2 options. One is a toolbox for families, which relates to all of the reopening support systems that are in place for our families, support videos, ways to access additional information, those kinds of things. The second is the 2020-2021 school year planning. That tab has been there really since last March or April when we started planning. If you click there, you will see what you're accustomed to seeing here, including a link back to the Families Toolbox, which we believe to be the most useful element of the website for families to rely upon right now, but also the reopening guide, which is regularly updated, the reopening FAQs, which are also regularly updated, some video presentations of our plan, and then you see the metrics reopening advisory team is listed here, as well as on the left toolbar. If you click there, you will see, if I can make that bigger for everyone. You will see what our metrics team has been looking at. Now, again, they've only had 2 meetings, but they have been really productive meetings in terms of discussing the metrics themselves, the thresholds related to those metrics, meaning what counts as a minimal risk, a moderate risk, and a more substantial risk, and how are we monitoring and tracking. There is a whole lot more work to do related to these metrics, especially the operational metrics. So we got a little bit of a start, but that start really reflects staff being on campus and not yet a lot of our students, right? We've had 25% of our students on campus, but really in the first 2 weeks, we haven't, these data don't really reflect that yet. So there is more work to do, but let me walk you through. In fact, what I'm going to do is draw your attention down to these reports that are down here. This is our dashboard, which gives you a quick overview of the metrics that we're reviewing. If you look at the metrics report from Friday's meeting, you will not only see the dashboard, but you also see where the data is drawn to feed the dashboard. So much of this is hand done at this point, I will admit, but it does, the dashboard gives you an overview of what we're looking at, and then the subsequent pages actually provide you access to those specific reports or data that are publicly available. So these are all the sources that we're using. They should be hot links, so you can actually go in and pull the most up-to-date data if you'd like. But for ease of review by the metrics advisory team, we've generated this report where the screenshot every Wednesday is provided actually within the report. So there's been times where on a Friday, the data has shifted a little and we've needed to talk about that. But for consistency's purpose, we're gathering these data on Wednesday. So the data really reflect Thursday through Wednesday in most instances. And the team can really look at this. So these are the metrics that feed the very top. We're looking at some of the COVID. Let me go back up here. All the top, let's see, 4 rows really relate to COVID positivity rate and transmission rate. And so you can see where those data are drawn. First, looking at the governor's Restore Illinois plan. Region 10 is the region we find ourselves in, but region 9 and 11 are nearby neighbors to us. So we're tracking the positivity rates there in each of those regions. Then we look at suburban Cook County. We're looking at new cases and test positivity rates. I'll tell you, in the first week, this number that you see now is 98, was just over 100. So that dot fell in that substantial range, something we were monitoring. Again, something falling within the red does not mean immediately shut down. It means that's something we really need to keep a close eye on. Is there something we can do? Or do we need to be kind of on notice that these data are changing and may change what we need to do in our schools? Next, you'll see new cases per 100,000. We're using a 7-day rolling average there we're looking at Wilmette, we're looking at Neutral Township and at the regional zip. And the regional zip is a reflection of our staff where they live. So 90% of our staff are reflected within the regional zip codes. We're very, very thankful. Originally, these data were being pulled directly from IDPH and then aggregated as a township. We were working on this. Now we've partnered with Northwestern University Medicine, and they are actually tracking these data, not only for us, but it's so helpful to us now. It is being used by many of the suburban districts and probably will be used even more broadly as people become aware of that. So I'll show you some examples of what those graphs look like.
What is useful? Which thing were you
Yeah,
doing?
so we originally were pulling these data for the Wilmette, Neutral Township, and regional zip codes, the new cases and the positivity rates. We were pulling that data from IDPH. The data is most certainly there, but to aggregate that data was a little bit laborious. And so we have partnered with Northwestern University Medicine, and they have now started to build out this website that gives you real-time data to look at. And so that's been really, really helpful. As we go down, I'll just talk through a couple more of these and then I'll show you some of the reports. So as we go down from the local and regional new cases and positivity rates, we start to look at COVID positive cases per school. Again, this is what we are being told by IDPH, that if a school has 1 or 2 cases, we are on watch, that that school may be required by the Department of Public Health to shut down. If we get to 3, it is almost certain that we would within a week. And so that's how those thresholds have been established. But again, in this instance, we are following directly what the IDPH will tell us. We don't have any yet to report on either of the 2 weeks where we have had reports come through, but those data will be reported here as well. Below that, you see operational metrics and supplies and facility needs. These are internal metrics that we're gathering. Here is where I would say we're gathering a lot of really useful data for our problem solving and for addressing challenges as they come up. I think there's probably going to be some better ways once all students are on campus to really monitor these data, social distancing and mask wearing in particular. Right now, these are staff reported data and we aggregate those across the district. Our thresholds have been set based on what we think we have the capacity to deal with. So if there's a persistent challenge at a school, a principal and the admin team with their staff will be able to handle a handful of persistent challenges at their school within a week and get them resolved by the end of the week. But more than that, they'll start to be overwhelmed and be focusing more on that than on teaching and learning. And that would be a challenge for us. And so that's how these metrics have been identified here. Same with supplies and facilities. Here you'll see this 27 kind of popped into that red zone. And that really is a reflection as we start to bring our students back in. We have some adjustments we need to make in what we thought would be a great classroom arrangement or a bathroom access arrangement. We need to make some adjustments. And so those are identified here. Again, not overwhelming, but our ability to address those within the week is something we're paying close attention to. And then you'll see staffing levels. Our human resources department are tracking staffing levels, absences across a variety of groups, availability of subs, and also working or not working during quarantine. We do have staff members who have needed to quarantine, not because necessarily a positive case of themselves, but potential exposure, a family member, those kinds of reasons. There's, as we're finding, many different reasons someone might need to quarantine. And so we're tracking that data as well. And then student absence rate. That's something we really want to track right now. It's looking very, very good. We're still in those first weeks of school. That's common. We're also very much in remote learning with some exceptions. And so we want to continue to monitor that. So again, as you kind of go through the report, you can see, yes, John?
Is there kind of a weighting system here for closing?
There's not a weighting system at this point for any of these metrics. It really is meant to give us talking points. So it is not so much as one metric alone is going to close down our schools, but put together, are there either mitigation strategies that we need to attempt, or do we need to be on alert that transmission is increasing within our region or our area, and therefore need to start to think about what might happen if that trend continues?
Just like what I heard, I think, was the COVID positive cases per school. That's the bottom line, right? If it goes up.
Well, that alone, there are certain metrics that are beyond our control that alone would shut us down, right?
Yeah, right.
COVID positive cases, a classroom could have to go on quarantine because there was an incident within their classroom. A school, if there's 2 or more instances, would need to close for a short period of time while we do contact tracing and the IDPH really investigates what's happening. The governor's Restore Illinois plan might close us down, again, outside of our control, if the region's rate goes up so high that he directs the closure of schools for in-person instruction. That too would be outside of our control. So there are some things that are beyond our control, but we're still monitoring it because we want to be prepared for that pivot if it comes to be. And there are other things that, as we look at them, like our operational metrics, we look at them and we think to ourselves, facility adaptations, is there a logical reason why that may be ticked up a little bit this week? And what can we do to make sure that next week it starts to come down a little bit? You're welcome. So this is the overview that we'll be looking at every week. Again, we've provided links here both for the metrics team to be able to review more in depth if they wish, but also making these publicly available for our community to monitor along with us if they'd like. As we go down, again, you saw the dashboard. What we're essentially doing is drawing data from each of these publicly available sources and putting it into our dashboard based on what our thresholds have been established. So here in Region 10, we're looking at the test positivity 7-day rolling average. And so we grab these data once a week and feed our metrics dashboard. The next page then gives us those next several lines, which are not only Region 10, but Region 9 and 11, to help us again monitor where are we starting to see spikes, or better yet, where are we starting to see declines in these resurgent data. And again, all of these are publicly available data. The Cook County, as you may have heard throughout the state, county level departments of public health are starting to guide school districts even more than they initially were. Some of that is really helpful. Of course, there are times where it's less helpful, but we do appreciate having access to the data. And so we can track and monitor these data really closely ourselves. Not only are the metrics available, but some of the metric guidance that has been provided by the local health departments is provided on the right, so that you can kind of start to see what they're saying about these metrics and what's most important for school districts to really be monitoring. Again, because the description of metrics seemed really important and helpful in interpreting some of these data, we've linked that in here. So anytime we found something that is useful to link, we've tried to make that as much available to the team as well as to our community as possible. This is the metric tracker that I was mentioning that is being created by Northwestern University. They continue to take our feedback and to make adjustments in how these data are presented. Again, what they are doing is pulling the data from the Illinois Department of Public Health and aggregating it in ways that are useful for school districts. So this is our Wilmette data. We talked quite a bit about this little bit of an uptick that we're seeing here and what appears to be maybe a slight downtick. And our epidemiologist on the team advised that she is hopeful, and what she is seeing is that there may be a continued downtick over this next week, and that would be wonderful news for us. We're very hopeful for that, but again, we won't know until the data presents itself. So we monitor these data, then we look at the New Trier Township, recognizing that our families and our students from across the township really do interact with each other, and so we want to continue to monitor the data across the township. And then these are our regional zip codes. And right now, this is 90% of the New Trier staff. We've had a member of our team do an analysis comparing the New Trier staff zip codes to our own Wilmette D39 zip codes. And there's a few additional zip codes that we hope to incorporate into our data tracking. And again, the Northwestern data tracker is helpful to us because before we were relying on what the township was gathering and tracking. Now we can put in our own zip codes. And again, I think we'll be adding 3 or 4 zip codes to these data and be able to track that more specific to Wilmette D39.
Just a quick one on that. Would we be subtracting some?
At this point, it doesn't look like it. There were, I think it was 3 specific zip codes that if we add 2, it covered maybe another 45 staff members of ours. And so we thought that would be important to include.
Okay.
And for whatever reason, those same regions weren't as
Right.
resided within when looking at the New Trier Township staff as a whole. And then we look at the rolling average of COVID positivity rates. Again, we're looking at Wilmette, we're looking at New Trier Township zip codes, and then we're looking at the regional zip codes. As the area gets broader, you see fewer spikes and dips in the data, and that's just because it's spread out across bigger areas. Then we get into some of the internally tracked data that we are monitoring. First, COVID positive cases reported. So among our students and then among our staff, right now we are at 0 for both of the weeks we have reported. We expect to continue to add to this. We look at our operational metrics. Again, district employees are asked to respond to a survey. Not all respond, but many do. And the survey really is asking them to identify where they are seeing persistent challenges. So it is our hope that those who are responding are those who have identified persistent challenges, and they're indicating that. So this, initially we talked about maybe making this a percentage analysis, what % of respondents are indicating that there's an issue. But as we looked at it more closely, we found that in fact, it's a frequency challenge for us. We can handle so many persistent challenges within a school and do it effectively within a week. When it goes beyond that, it starts to get overwhelming for that school and draws our attention away from teaching and learning. And so we decided and settled on a frequency report of these. You can see that in the first week when we had staff only, there were some challenges identified with social distancing and mask wearing, even for us adults. These are new behaviors and we need to continue to practice those. That upticked a little. And it likely will this week as well, I will readily admit, as we continue to welcome students back and become more comfortable with this. We expect that that will continue to identify some challenges for us before we start to see that settle into a new norm. Yes, Mark.
Just as a comment on that for the board, and this is building on John's point, this is once again a metric that is not mechanical in nature. There's no sort of trigger and then we do this. And one particular reason on this metric is because it's very hard to identify if we get 5 reports of an incident, it can sometimes be that we have 5 people reporting the same incident, and that makes it difficult to sort of disaggregate. So we have to be thoughtful about what the metric really means in more depth than what we see on the chart. So I just want to set expectations that we may see spikes in this, and they may be very easy to take action and alleviate without, without much worry about it. So.
The other thing that is noteworthy from first week to second week is the team advised that it may be helpful to allow for anonymous reporting. And so the second week's survey results reflect those who identified themselves in the report and those who did not identify themselves in the report. So they were able to submit a concern without identifying who they were. That is helpful in so much as it gives people anonymity in identifying a challenge. It can be challenging in so much as it's really hard to address a problem if we don't have enough detail in order to really tackle it. So again, that's maybe a little bit of a difference that we're seeing from one week to the next. We're looking to evaluate washroom breaks and lunch safety management. That's especially important at the elementary level as our students need a little more support in both. But that will come as we enter into this week and really probably in subsequent weeks. That data is not being gathered this week as we do one day for each classroom. We look at self-certification compliance, and these likely, because it was the first 2 days of school, it was hard to gather all of this and care for the kids at the same time. So there may be some underreporting here, but essentially our students coming to school with their signed self-certification ticket and are they passing the temperature screening? If either of those two does not happen, the students go to the nursing tent where the nurse has to take follow-up action. And so in consultation with our nurses, we found that they believe they can handle about 16 students in the nursing tent before they start to feel overwhelmed. And so we folded that into our metrics, 16 per school, which would be about 96 district-wide on average a day. We're well below that, and we're really happy to be well below that. We did recognize that there were a couple of schools that popped up a little more than some of our other schools. And so those are some things that we need to continue to work on and make sure that we're clearly communicating with our parents and students, and also making sure that we're following our procedures there. Next, you see our PPE availability and facility adaptations. These are, again, two things we've been working really hard at. There were some supply chain issues initially, but we now, on Friday, I sent a message out to staff saying we have everything you could possibly need and more. Come get it, including gloves and masks and face shields and desk shields and all of those important tools for within our classrooms. And so we've already seen a downtick in that, at least in the survey results I was looking at this morning. So we're really happy that that is the case, but we do expect at some point, if the pandemic continues, we may hit some challenges there, just as any school district might. So we want to continue to monitor that. And then the facility adaptations really takes into account what challenges do you see within your classroom or within the school that might prevent you or hinder you from implementing our health guidance. So there's a couple of teachers who need help now that they see how kids fit into the classroom. They want to rearrange some of the furniture in their classrooms. Or there's a few challenges that have been identified as students are passing in the hallway or going to a bathroom break. How can we make sure students remain safe and separated? And so some of those challenges we're working through. And then we look at staffing levels. And again, our human resources department are pulling these data once a week to report to us. We recognize that right now, especially in terms of staff absences, while we have in a typical year, the ability to cover for staff absences, that's really hindered right now in a pandemic, both because substitutes are less available and because we are really limiting the number of people coming into our buildings. So we have some permanent subs who are employed, some people who have been assigned to support us in subbing for periods or day-long sessions. But this, again, is something we really need to closely monitor. If our sick days for our staff start to spike, this may be a metric that would guide us to rethink what's happening within our schools. So we look at certified staff, we look at custodial staff, we look at our support staff, which typically would include custodial staff, but we've pulled them out because we recognize how really critical that smaller number of employees are to our implementation of health and safety guidelines at this point. So we've separated those two groups out. Availability of substitutes. This really is a metric of unfilled absences. So if someone is absent, are we able to fill that position, or do we need to do an internal sub kind of a thing there? And then we're also monitoring staff quarantine rates. Can they work while they're on quarantine, or do they need to not work? And some jobs certainly lend themselves well to being able to work while on quarantine. Some of our teaching positions, even some of our paraprofessional positions can work while on quarantine. There are other positions such as our cook or our custodians that really that job does not lend itself well to working on quarantine. And so there are some staff members who, if they're on quarantine, even if it's just for a day, that needs to be reported to us, because that, again, becomes a position that needs to be filled. The team asked for some additional information regarding vacant positions. So we incorporated that into this week's report. And then we're looking at student absences, and we look at this by school, but the overall metric is looked at across the district. We're looking at absentee rates. We tend as a district to run about 4.5% of absences throughout a typical school year. And so we're comparing there. We do expect absences will go up slightly if this pandemic continues, but we want to make sure that students have access to learning as well. And so again, if student absences start to go up significantly for our in-person learners, that may be a time where we start to talk about, does this make sense, or should we be offering more of a remote program?
Carrie, I had a quick question on that.
Yeah.
I know we had asked for like typical, and you got that, and that was great. And we had said can that be broken down by month or week? And you said, no, that's way too much. Could it be broken down by quarter? Because there is a significant difference between, first quarter and second quarter. I don't know if that's a granularity that you have access to, but for some reports, it seems like that might be possible.
Yeah, I think we were going to look into that a little further for staff absences and for student absences. Again, I think there probably, as the team talked about, is a point of really that would be pulling last year's data in comparability to this year's data. And so there's probably a point where that granularity isn't as helpful as it could be, but we are going to be looking at it to see if there's something in the quarter basis is a good thing for us.
Yeah, because I mean, we know for sure there's more people that are sick in a typical year in November and December than in September. But okay, thank you.
And then we look at students on quarantine. We did have one student to report this week who was on quarantine, and then classes on quarantine. We did not have any on quarantine this week. So again, these are all the data that we'll be looking at as a team on a regular basis, both to advise on what adjustments we need to make in school, as well as to ensure that we're prepared for adjustments in terms of pivoting as the weeks unfold. Also on this page, we have our team purpose. We've listed some of these resources. If someone wants to track these metrics live, we've provided 3 direct links to these sources. So if you click here, you can go directly to, oh, that one isn't working exactly correctly, actually. Let me go back. Of course, the one I click on is not, I wonder if it'll work if I click here. So I just clicked in the wrong spot. So this is that Northwestern website that I identified or was talking a little bit about. If you put in Wilmette, you can click on that zip code and then click on show data, and it will show you today's data, the last 7 days, the last 14 days. It will show you over the last week. And then you can also see the rolling average charts that we've been looking at. And sure enough, our epidemiologist looks to be correct in terms of seeing that rate slightly decline. And hopefully that will continue to be the case. This spike right here gave some cause for worry. So again, on our dashboard, we're trying to make everything as live and accessible for everyone as possible. We've listed our metrics reopening advisory team membership because we did get some questions about who was on that. We will meet every Friday morning from 7:15 to 8:15. This is an administrative meeting, so it is not a board meeting. It's not subject to Open Meetings Act. We have received a few questions about that. But if there are people who would like to visit the team meeting, while we typically wouldn't do that for an administrative meeting, we have made allowances for that. So someone can register as a visitor and sit in the meeting if they so choose. And we have, I think at both meetings, Tony, had a couple of visitors sit and listen to the discussion. So that's been nice too. We plan to add a link here so that if somebody does want to register as a visitor, they're able to do that as well. So that is our metrics reopening advisory team and dashboard. I know there's lots of questions. Thanks for letting me get through all of that first. Who?
Question from Lisa.
It's not a question.
Oh.
It's just, wow. That is an incredible amount of data, an incredibly thoughtful dashboard. I have no idea how you get through it all in an hour. But I just want to say hats off to the team, Carrie, your team, and Mark and Frank for sitting on this committee. It is beyond thoughtful.
It is a lot of work, but I think it's important work and will guide our continued improvements. And again, I think especially in terms of the operational metrics, it's been really useful for us to hear directly from our staff, and our administrators and school teams have been doing a tremendous job responding to those needs within the week and really problem solving at the school-based level to address those needs as they come up. That is the one of the tremendous benefits of the slower opening is allowing us to really problem solve as challenges come up rather than getting overwhelmed along the way. So thank you.
Questions or go ahead, John.
So on Friday, what if you guys decide, oh, we're going to shut down the schools? What is the communication plan?
Yes, great question. So every Friday we have a meeting. That information is then reviewed over Friday, and by Monday evening at 5 o'clock, really the time for whatever reason was set at 5:15, but by 5:15 Monday night, families should hear from the Metrics Reopening Advisory Team. They'll get an update. It comes directly from the school district on those recommendations. And so every Monday, our families can expect an update.
And just to be clear on the timeline, because some people may be confused. So the committee meets on Friday and we have the discussion.
Yeah.
And then that gives Carrie the information she needs to consider and make thoughts. That communication goes out 5:15 on Monday. It is for the subsequent week. So not for Tuesday through Wednesday, Thursday, Friday,
not
that
for
week.
Oh, so it's like a
It's for the
week in
next Monday.
advance.
10 days out.
Oh, that's great.
So September 11th affects the week of September 21st. This Friday's meeting, which is September 18th, will affect the week of September 28th and thereon.
Oh, that's great.
And that's really critical timing,
Yeah.
both for our families' preparedness for adjustments, also for our staff's preparedness for adjustments, our teachers, so that they can plan, whether they're planning for remote or in person, those adjustments need to be made. I will say, and this is like the ever-present caveat, there are causes that would lead us to pivot more quickly than that in terms of shutting down. Opening up, we can be more thoughtful because that is, we're preparing for that. But the cause to shut down, it could be that if there are 2 COVID cases, we will need to shut down the school for the very next day, and that notice would go out as quick as we receive that notice from the IDPH. So it's a slow open, a quick close, unfortunately, based on the pandemic and the transmissions that could be possible.
So how is that done? Is that email, text?
All
Like
of
if
the
it were a
above,
real
yes. Yeah.
Fast close.
A fast close would be similar to a school closure for snow or weather-related instances. So that communication would go out as an emergency alert to our families, notifying them that there's been an incident and the IDPH is advising us to either close down a classroom or close down the school. And again, we hope that more often than not, that would be a short-term closure while they do contact tracing. We believe that the mitigation strategies we have in place will limit transmission at school. But there are times where families and students are gathering outside of school. And so there could be the instance where there are 2 or 3 cases, not because of school-based transmission, but because of community events that then lead to more than one individual within a school having a case. The IDPH, or really it's the Cook County Department of Public Health, would then investigate that, do some contact tracing, and let us know. They really are the authority on that. They tell us we have to close down the classroom, we have to close down the school. We've learned quite a bit from our neighbors who have had these instances occur already, where they have been advised either the class has to quarantine for 14 days, as just happened in one of our neighboring schools, or the whole school has to close for 14 days, which happened, I think, at Loyola Academy somewhat recently. They needed to close down for 2 weeks and then have just recently reopened.
That's what we've learned, that it'd be 2 weeks.
It depends. It depends. It's first for a couple of days while they do contact tracing. And if that contact tracing leads them to believe it would be safer to close the whole school, they will advise us accordingly. If they believe it is a smaller and more contained situation, then they may advise us just that class has to quarantine because the class has been exposed, but the rest of the school hasn't. And again, because of our bubbling approach to learning at this point, we have done everything we possibly can to ensure that we can only close down a classroom and not the whole school if there is a localized incident.
I'm done.
So Amy next, and then I know Ellen has a question.
Quick question. I also applaud your efforts. This is so helpful and a lot of work. So thank you. One question I had when you were presenting was about the anonymity in reporting challenges, school-based challenges. And so my thoughts when I heard that is, we really want to encourage people to report what they're seeing. So I understand that. I also feel like we really want to intervene and solve the problem. So I'd love to hear, that feels like a rub to me. I didn't know if
Yeah.
there's any.
It's definitely a challenge. And
Okay.
in the first week, it was really helpful because we had everyone's identification and the principals could go directly to that staff member and say, okay, you've noticed this issue happening. Let's problem solve it. In the second week, I think our principals have shared that there have been a few challenges that are more difficult to address simply because the information that is shared says something like there's a mask wearing problem and it's that staff member walking down the hall all the time, but they don't identify the staff member, they don't identify the hallway. And so we're kind of stuck with, okay, we're going to send out a blast to everybody, reminding everyone that they have to wear their mask, which is helpful, but sometimes being more targeted is even more helpful. And so it's a balance of an imperfect solution either way. So.
And I guess I would wonder, is there a concern about reporting with your, I don't know. That feels unfortunate to me in terms of our real attempt to problem solve.
We agree.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
we agree. And most are willing to share who they are. I think sometimes it's uncomfortable for adults to share concerns about other adults, just as
Sure.
it can be uncomfortable
Yes.
for me to remind you, Amy, just
Yes.
check your nose.
Yes.
Sometimes our staff members are less comfortable doing that with their peers. And so we continue to emphasize that it is all of our responsibilities to do that in real time, because the other issue is this sometimes is like a week later.
Right.
And so while we can address it within the week, if it happened last week and I'm not getting that information on Tuesday, there's some lag time there. So absolutely, that anonymity is problematic. The other challenge, as Mark pointed out, is once it's anonymous, we don't know if it's the same incident being reported 5 times,
right,
or if it's all different incidences, which need to be dealt with maybe a little bit differently. So again, those operational metrics, as we get stabilized in our in-person models, I suspect will be revised. And so that longitudinal data will look different just because we'll be collecting it differently in the future, hopefully.
Ellen had a question.
Pardon me.
Comment.
As we work through making these decisions, I'm just wondering, something stuck in my throat. Just wondering how closely we're still working with all of our neighboring district schools, like particularly like New Trier, for instance, because a lot of siblings from our district go to New Trier, and sorry, something in my throat. So I'm just wondering how that plays into our decisions, metrics wise. I know that we're looking at cases and stuff, but also, are you still talking with, is there still superintendents collaboration on stuff?
Yes.
Is there a lot of information being exchanged?
Yes, every day. We talk every day. We have a standing meeting once a
Support
week
meeting.
formally, but every day and every time there is an instance that occurs in another district, we hear about it. We don't hear the specifics because there is some privacy situations that we have to attend to. And in fact, just last week, we were talking about what authority we do have to share identities of individuals. And right now we don't, but what we can do is partner with the families to ensure that that information is shared. And so typically when there's a case that's identified within the township, I hear about that case first before it even kind of gets shared out, because again, we're coordinating efforts to the greatest extent possible. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just had a couple of procedural things. The meetings have been great. The attendee list is a really good representation, and I think everybody participates. So we don't have, people there, but are, thinking about other things. And I wanted to applaud that your staff has both responded to questions quickly, but also have come up with new ideas and brought in new concepts. And I think that's really great. It's easy on these things because you get bogged down in so many numbers to not come up with new ideas, but it seems like every meeting there's been, and here's something else we thought of, and here's something that could move things forward. So I appreciate that effort. And I think the list, as you go through it, there's a lot of really good experts. So the idea is the meeting collects information from lots of the participants so that you can make a good decision. And I think that's the important thing, that you're the one that has to synthesize all that information, because some of these numbers, you know, on any given week could be outside of range, but that doesn't mean the trend. And that's where you come in, that you look at what it really means based on the input from the people in this meeting. And I think that's an important way that this has been set up.
Frank, I just want to piggyback on what you said. You know, I have gotten some feedback from board members that maybe we just need a little quick recap on dance floor balcony when it comes to COVID. An example, just the example that you gave, Frank, on kind of who makes the decision on opening and closing. Carrie, would you mind just giving us kind of your perspective on kind of what's the board's role in COVID? Just how you see it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the board obviously gave us the vision and the goals for our reopening planning over the summer. Then the board was able to approve our plan and approve some adjustments to the calendar, including that first week of professional development, as well as the welcome weeks, and we appreciated that support. At this point, what the metrics team is doing is advising me on adjustments to that, what is essentially the default plan. So the default plan right now is to proceed with the Wilmette welcome weeks as have been designed, with a whole lot of thought and a whole lot of consideration. And I know that there are many families out there who want us to expedite that, and I know the board does as well. I will tell you, I do as well, but I want to make sure that we're doing it safely. And so on a weekly basis, I expect the metrics reopening advisory team to make a recommendation to me. If that recommendation does support an adjustment to the plan, I can then implement that adjustment. But short of that recommendation, I can't just on my own make an adjustment to the reopening plan. And I know there's been a little bit of confusion there. I am beholden to the board and the approval that the board has given me to make adjustments, but make adjustments under the advisement of the metrics reopening advisory team.
Terrifically helpful. And then I also just want to open it up to the board. Are there other dance floor balcony questions as it relates to COVID? Do you have concerns about where the authority lies and kind of, yeah, we'll just open it up. Or do we all feel clear after that explanation?
I mean, I feel, do you mind if I say something? I mean, I feel clear, but I think that given the unique COVID situation and that we are elected representatives of the people, that mistakes, you know, well, they fall on the administration, they also fall on the board. So I think in this case, we probably are asking more questions than we normally would because of how politically sensitive this issue is.
Others? Okay, thank you.
And along those lines, I will then give the update from Friday's reopening team.
Just before you do, I just
Please.
wanted to draw on, staying on the metrics for a second, I did want to draw the board's attention to one thing that I found important on page 13. So I just want everybody to be aware, we have the stat at the top, the staffing levels, certified sick day staff, and one of our members, you know, asked, could we see what the average for last year looks like? And I just want to point out, and I don't know, Carrie, if you want to make any comment, if you don't, that's fine, but 66.5 is the average number of certified staff sick days absences per week. That would put us in the substantial category. I just want everybody to sort of process that fact. That's not true of any of the other metrics that I'm aware of. It wasn't true for the support staff, et cetera. But I just want people to process the fact that if we have an average year or a year that looks like the average last year, we will have a large number of weeks that are in that substantial piece, right? Because in fact, on average, we will be in that. Now, we're not at the beginning of the year, but as Frank pointed out, there's seasonality to this and whatnot. So anyway, I wanted to flag that for people's attention because we shouldn't be surprised when that happens. Carrie, I don't know if there's anything you want to say about that. It's fine if you don't.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And we recognize at this point that daily average by school, we believe we can accommodate up to 2 by school of certified staff. So certified staff means our teachers, our administrators, anyone who has a license to be performing the work that they're doing. We could accommodate up to 2. Beyond that, we start to have some significant challenges with staffing our classrooms and ensuring the health and safety of our students and other staff members. And so that threshold is much lower this year than in a typical year, again, because our access to subs is lower and the ability for us to bring subs into our schools is also reduced. And so we have to really keep a close eye on that. But I appreciate your pointing that out, because you're right. It does mean that if we hit the average in a typical year, we could be experiencing some challenges in this unique year.
And just to forestall any misunderstanding of that, because the number 66 kind of looks like a high number, or 60 looks like a high number, that's 3%. It's a hair above 3%. So if we have a little bit more than 3% of staff, certified staff, not able to come in, which, you know, to me, 3% that's not a particularly high number, but that's where we start to get into that substantial zone. So, okay. Thank you. Does anybody else have anything before we move on
Ellen
to
raised
the
her hand.
Friday?
Yeah,
So, go
actually,
ahead.
on page 16, the vacant positions, that's current?
That was current as of 9/9. Heather?
So the support staff, does that include paras and how there just aren't any, are there people applying, or it's just not people out there?
No, there are people applying, and actually this is pretty typical for us where we sit in terms of the start of the school year. It's not abnormal to have unfilled support staff positions. In fact, it might even be a little bit less right now than it is in a typical year. So I'm confident that those will be filled within the next couple of weeks, if not sooner, because the principals are working on that.
Really nice to know. I actually was, I was thinking about that because in my experience, that was something that is a slow thing in the beginning of school to begin with. And I was curious if that was typical. So thank you for clarifying that.
Anything else before we move on to Friday's discussion? Thanks.
Okay, well, then I'm just happy to give the board an update. Again, this information will be shared with families later today. The metrics team did really look closely at all of these data and had a pretty in-depth discussion about the operations in particular. Remembering that our elementary school students attended school 1 day per week last week, which did not include lunch. This week's 1 day per week will include lunch. So we recognize there is quite a bit of data gathering and support that will be accomplished this week. We also balance that with the desire to have our students in person as quickly and effectively as possible, and the recognition that our youngest learners are needing to learn routines in order to implement those effectively. And so when a young student only comes 1 day per week, it's hard to have that carryover to the following week. So it gives us the ability to problem solve and really address the challenges that pop up, but we want to start to see that frequency increase. And so the Wilmette weeks have allowed us for that. This week, our students will be here full-time 1 day per week across all grade levels. Next week, they'll be here 2 days per week. And the team really spent some time talking about, does that make sense? Should we instead next week look to expedite it, going from 1 day per week, full day, to looking at next week, the full week? Let's just bring all of our students in. Are we ready for that? And the team really thoughtfully considered that. They came to the conclusion that at this point, they want to see 1 more week of implementation at 2 days per week before they make that decision. One of our principals had a really good suggestion, acknowledging that our kindergarten and first grade students are those who struggle probably the most outside of some of our special education students with accessing the remote learning environment. And so there was some advocacy around bringing in our kindergarten and first grade students on a more full-time basis next week, while we continue to strengthen our implementation for the following week for everyone coming in. after a whole lot of discussion, the team decided that their recommendation was to stay the course, stick to the Wilmette Welcome Weeks for one more week with a firm commitment to review that for the following week. And so there were quite a few differences of opinion there, and yet there was some consensus reached that at this point there wasn't strong enough evidence to support jumping from 1 day per week to 5 days per week in the following week. So for right now, this week we're 1 day per week, full days. Next week we will be 2 days per week, full days at our elementary schools, and then there's the option to go to full implementation in the following week, or to stick with the default plan, which would be 2 weeks of 2 day per week before we implement full time. There were some other areas that we have made some adjustments, and so I just want to point those out to the team. In addition to, again, reviewing this Friday on the 18th for implementation of something possibly different on the 28th, we also have looked at increasing and making sure everyone knows where to get PPE supplies. We experienced some challenges with our thermometers this week. I don't know if any of you who sent children to school recognize this happening. If you didn't, I'm glad that you didn't. It was an issue with some of our thermometers and just their reliability and running out of batteries really quickly. So we have now replaced all of those thermometers to make that a little easier. We've expanded our cleaning and disinfecting procedures in all of our classrooms. We have purchased some devices for electrostatic spraying that will be used every day when students are on campus and in classrooms. And then we also have, as the board is aware, those UVC lights. We continue to make improvements to our lunch procedures. In particular, this past week, we had our 5-8 students in for lunch. It did not go perfect, but it went relatively well. So we know that we have some improvements to make there. We know that when our students' masks come down, that is a quiet time to eat lunch. Our students just aren't accustomed to that yet. And so for some of our students, that was, what did they say? They said it was a little cringy, like a little awkward for them to sit in a room with their peers and not be talking. So we're looking at some options for what to do there. Of course, when the weather is nice, we want our students to go outside. And so while we couldn't pursue that this past week, we're looking at doing that in the weeks to come, and at doing some other activities that don't require talking during that first 15 minutes or so of lunchtime. We're also continuing to look at bathroom schedules, in particular at the elementary level, making sure kids have access to the bathrooms and that there's proper spacing when they're going to and coming from are some things that we're looking at as well. We're also making a review this week of our remote learning environment and asking our teachers for some feedback on how things are going there as we continue to support our remote learners. And then we'll be looking at doing some kind of a survey in the near future of our parents as well. We need to kind of get a foundation going before we ask for additional feedback, because when we do, we want to make sure that we can respond to that feedback. So we're hoping to do that in the coming weeks. So those are all the adjustments we've made. At this point, again, next week we'll proceed as our Wilmette Weeks has been designed, and then it's the following week that we'll be looking at this Friday for a possible change on the 28th.
So I just want to say congratulations for getting in person up and running. I know there was a general buzz of excitement in the community and in my home. So I heard nothing but delight to be in school. And I know that that was a heavy lift, so thank you all. So looking at the metrics and hearing that idea about K1, getting those kids back quicker, that to me sounded like a really good idea, given a lot of the communication I've seen from community members about how really challenging it is to have kids, younger kids especially, on Zoom. So to the extent the committee can take a serious look at that in light of all this data, and I think it would be well warranted. I don't know what other people think.
Go ahead, John.
I completely agree with President Babes on this. And I did want to also call out, I think the quality of the remote is much, much better, you know, and is working pretty well. So thank you for that.
That is good feedback to have. We recognize that for all students, that remote environment is going to be critically important this year, even if they're scheduled to be an in-person learner. that remote environment will continue to be part of their learning environment. So thank you. Our teachers have worked incredibly hard on that, so we'll pass that along to them. Thank you.
Other thoughts on this piece? Yeah, Frank?
I just want to reiterate that, you know, as much as we can get all the kids back, but we really, really have to get the K in one. I mean, if you think about a first grader, last year they were in kindergarten, and kindergarten is noticeably different than regular school. It's introductory. So those kids have never been, quote unquote, in school. So it's unbelievably difficult for me to imagine what they're able to get out of pure remote. So the sooner they can be in school without being an education expert, but just common sense, it has to be, you know, worked at as hard as we can. And I know we are, but I mean, certainly I applaud the effort to try to do that.
Frank, that's right. And so the metrics team will take a close look at that this Friday. I think the other thing to keep in mind is that for our fully remote learners, routines are being built for that remote environment. Those who are anticipating transitioning back to in-person, building those routines, we're a little bit in limbo land right now because teachers are trying to build the routines of a remote environment while recognizing we're preparing for an in-person environment for those classrooms as well. So it will be helpful as we transition students back. Thank you for your support there. I thought that was a brilliant idea that our elementary principals came up with, and I hope sincerely that the metrics team will look at that, if not for K1 students, for all students, as we look at the week of the 28th. Ellen.
Well, I agree with Frank in terms of theory of, you know, I'm so pleased to have my daughter back in school. Well, not as pleased as she is to be back in school, and it went very well. Carrie, thank you so much for clarifying just now the difference. I think it's really important to acknowledge how much work has gone into the remote learning piece of it, and how crucial it is to acknowledge that it's not just so that just as a means or a springboard for going back into school, because we do have quite a few families who have chosen that for their very good own reasons, and acknowledging that those parents that have chosen that we are equally committed to making that experience an excellent one for those kids too, and that it's not like a second tier or anything. It's so important because there's a good chance at some point that all kids will be remote learning at some point. You know, I hope not, but it is what it is. Like, that's the whole point of this of what you've designed here, which is amazing, is the ability to, as you've said, pivot back and forth as we need to. But the base of it is actually the remote piece, the need for that to be really robust and be able to carry our learners through this pandemic. The one question I have, and I don't know if this may be like a new piece, a new item or whatever, but with that in mind, I think, you know, there's been so much excitement with the kids that have chosen to go back into the schools, and being able to like see friends and all that. And the one thing I've heard is that, and I don't know how you accomplish this, if it's just kind of a new issue, I guess, but we've kind of put a lot of things for good reason, very good reasons, because this is just the enormity of this whole project is mind-boggling. And I kudos to you and all the teachers and staff and everyone for making this happen. But in due time, we have pushed aside our strategic plan in some ways, and I think the biggest part of our strategic plan was building community, and I think we have to maybe pick up on that again in some way, somehow, so that our community, the schools, the school spirit, all of those things, that we can somehow build those things. And I'm sure that all of they're not here still anymore, but the school principals, if somehow, once we get past this initial phase of phasing in and the awkwardness of getting through this, if we can put some focus on that and allowing the families and students at home to work with the teachers that are remote teaching, as well as the students that are hybrid learning, and figure out a way to bring them together and build up that sense of community again. I think it would be nice. It would be a healing thing for everyone, and it would be, we still want, the Mustangs to be the Mustangs, and it would be, I think, a really nice thing to figure out a plan for that next. So I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think you're absolutely right. The community building is so critical for our remote learners, but also for our in-person learners who are, quite frankly, more isolated than in a typical school year, because they have only their bubble that they're interacting with. And so we're seeing that across both environments, that community building will be important. I also think I really appreciate what you said was once we get kind of that foundation laid, because right now we're so focused on building those routines for our remote learners and for our in-person learners, that we really need to make sure that is done well and right for the purpose of teaching and learning first. And then how can we build that community and those connections back in once we have teaching and learning rolling a little bit more. So
Right.
Thank you for acknowledging that does necessarily have to come a little bit later, but I know our principals are already thinking about ways to do that.
Right. And I mean, I just one more thing. It was part of my question to Heather even about staffing and the paras and all, just a personal statement, I guess, is that in a typical year, things don't all happen like the second school starts. It takes time, and we're only in the second week of school. IEPs take time, assigning paras takes time. None of that happens in a typical year. The first week of school, or even the second or third, takes time, and this is so different. There's going to be misplaced kids and misplaced teachers. Like there's so many changes going on. And so, yeah, the patience to get through this kind of awkward month where there's also Jewish holidays and Labor Day. And I think last year we went to school, like we didn't have a full week, the whole month of September. And, I think we all have short memories about stuff like that, but I just kind of have been thinking about on that lately. And I was like, okay, just get through this. And you guys are just doing an incredible job. Like you really are. And everything in due time, I think will come together. I think it really will. It's amazing the job you guys are doing. So thank you.
So I want to keep us going, but just real quick, what I heard is that the board would like Frank and me as the representatives on the metrics committee to express a strong support for this K through pre-K, so keep 39K and 1 coming in on the 28th, would that be, for full time? So this what one of the principals suggested. Get not
Just like, if not everybody.
Right. I'd like to summarize it the other way, that we want to try and see if the conditions support, but to try to get all of the K through 4 in, but at the very least, the K through 1.
I think that was better said.
Thank you.
Do we have consensus on that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Do it. The other last point I wanted to make before we move on is, one thing that has struck me out of all of these metrics is a communication to all the people that we interface with, to our communities and whatnot, which is, look, if we get 2 or 3 cases in the school, it's probably gonna make the school go all remote. So if you are a big fan of in-person, many of our community are, remember, you gotta practice safe practices all the time, not just in school, but on the fields and in the plays, in the play dates, because it's not gonna matter. If 3 kids get sick in a school, it doesn't matter, the school can do nothing about that part. And it's gonna go remote. So I just wanna remind all of us and you know, the community by extension, this is not a school-only effort. This is a community-wide team effort. Yeah, Frank.
I don't know if it makes sense for our community as much as it did for the high school, but I mean, I know that Superintendent Sally did a 3-minute, you know, if you don't do your part, the ships will sink and, you know, will be bombed by the enemy. Sorry, bad analogy, but I mean, he really tried to bring across the point that, you know, every single person can make a difference. And it was a 2 or 3 minute video, so it wasn't too painful to watch, but.
So mine is about 6 minutes. It'll
Okay,
go out
there
at
we
1
go.
o'clock today. It's a little
Oh,
longer
perfect.
because I was trying to review
That's-
the metrics,
Okay,
metrics
great.
team too, but yes, absolutely. I think that's a really important point that it is all of us, our remote learners, our in-person learners, everyone together does have an impact on our transmission rates and on the rate of COVID positive cases that occur within our community and within our school. And so it is absolutely critical. And our teachers, I know, have been talking about this with their students. I heard from several 5-8 teachers who, you know, our 5th or 8th grade students have a little more freedom, I think, on the weekends and otherwise. And so reminding them too, we all want to be in person. We all want to be healthy. These are the things we have to do. So absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that.
I'm gonna, just while we're on the topic, I'll be the first one to like say this. It includes being really, really honest. It's cold and flu season and allergy season right now. And it's really important to be honest about your children if they have a symptom or a fever or whatever. It's not, you're not like, this is not like you're going to be marked with a, this, you know, like some symbol that says you cannot, you know, ever come to our community again. If your child gets a fever, the thing to do is to call the nurse right away and be responsible and report it, because if they don't know that you're dealing with that, then they can't trace it. And all it requires is then going to your doctor and probably then I can tell you going to get COVID tested. And if it's negative, then you stay home for a couple more days to make sure it's okay. And then that's it. But it is different than other cold and flu seasons because you don't know whether a cold or flu is just a cold or a flu. There's just no way to know, even though it seems benign. So you have to be responsible.
Yeah.
So that leads me, I brought this up before, but if you're one of those 3 kids who is positive and you shut your school down, I'd love us to think about how we're helping to talk about that, because that's going to weigh heavy. And so yes, we want people to be honest with it. And I just think it's a reality. And so it's on us as parents to have those conversations with our kids. But also if there's a way for teachers to begin talking about it, like this is likely to happen, and it doesn't mean there's no, to help with the stigma as much as we can.
I was just going to say that as someone who's been living for the past few weeks through work, in-person K-4 learning, it's absolutely doable. The protocols are being followed, and I'm reminded of how important the in-person connection is. You know, we haven't been together since March. It's great.
Anything else before we close out the strategy part of this meeting? Great. Lisa?
Thank you. Okay, we are going to go to old business. I know that our equity work has not been the focus due to COVID and everything involved with reopening, but does anybody have any updates? Amy.
I don't have an update, but I have a question. I
Yep.
wonder if we want, as a board, to try to read the book at a certain point, regardless of whether or not our facilitator will be, at what point our facilitator will be able to bring in. I feel like personally, I want to read it, but I want to read it when we're reading it together, even if we don't have a conversation about it at that time. But I also know it may not be manageable right now. So it's just a question.
So, Carrie, I'm going to turn this to you because we're going to do this with the administration. And I understand how tired everyone is. And I probably know that right now you don't want to go home and read a book that's intense. So just in terms of timing, do you want to give us a thought?
Yes, I think, first of all, I know that our team collectively is very much committed to this work and wants to do it and wants to do it in partnership with everyone when we can really focus our energy and attention onto it. I fear that any start point sooner than October will not allow us to give the attention to it as we would all hope to do. So I would suggest that we start reading in October, and if the board is so inclined, I can develop just kind of like a timeline so that we can kind of march through it together. And then we'll look to have a facilitator come in, hopefully if we start in October, hopefully by late November, early December, we're having a more in-depth conversation about the book as a team. Does that
Right.
sound like a reasonable time frame?
And if that feels, given what's happening, like too much, we can revisit that. This is, right, all hands on deck to get and keep schools going.
And that's the priority, 100%.
Yes.
I was just thinking, is there a way, and I when I was saying it, honestly, I was not thinking about adding a thing to administrators' plates. So that is my priority for sure. It was just something.
No,
in my-
Amy, you were
so-
right to raise the question.
Yes.
I just want to
Yep,
give
no,
Carrie
very
the
important.
leeway.
By October now, then we should be in implementation, and certainly there will be some other issues that will pop up, no doubt. But let's build out a calendar starting in that first week of October, and then we'll go from there. Good, great, thank you. Thanks for continuing to advance the conversation.
There are other old business. Okay, I'm going to move on to new business. One of the board members had brought up some communications challenges, and that, this is an incredibly challenging time. And people have different ways that they receive information and would like to receive information. We have a lot of information out there. We just saw an unbelievable amount of information on metrics. That being said, I want to open up the conversation for suggestions. I want to actually turn it over to Carrie, who's got some ideas about changing or modifying some communication, and then I'll open it up for discussion.
So there's a couple of things that are kind of unfolding right now. So the Monday update will go to all families from the metric review team. This week's update will include a little video from me for the fun that is. But the transparency on the website hopefully aids that. Certainly we needed to get kind of our feet under us before we could open that up to public review. But we're eager to, launch and share that website. Beyond that, I know that each of our school teams have been working feverishly to communicate directly to their families. I know that there's a ton of information that goes to families in those Friday updates from principals. I recognize that sometimes there's information in there that gets overlooked, and so they're doing the best they can to kind of coordinate that. From a district level, I'm trying to back off a little on my communication so that parents are really focused on what's coming from the school as the highest priority. Our principals are also, now they've identified some communication channels for our remote only families as well as for our in-person families. What we were finding is that sometimes we were communicating to both at the same time, and that I think was leaving some of our remote families feeling like, I don't need to hear again about the school arrival procedure. My child isn't planning to arrive to school. And so separating some of those communications out have been, I think, really important, and making sure that we have those channels available as well. We're also hosting some parent webinars coming up. So in particular, there's a special education parent webinar happening. We've received quite a few questions just about what happens in this remote environment, what happens in the in-between environment that we're living in right now in the hybrid model, and how can we ensure that families know what to expect. So we've sent out a ton of information, but recognize we need to do some chunking there and also just do some more real-time communication. So we're hoping to do that this week. I think it's already scheduled, Thursday. And then probably the following week, we'll do something similar for our remote-only families. And then subsequent to that for our in-person families. So we're really trying to line that up in a strategic way. We are working too with a communications consultant. Right now, we don't have our communications director position filled. That might be one of those vacancies that you see on the sheet. But we are working with a consultant who is helping just to kind of manage some of the social media stuff for us and make sure that our communications are getting out as quickly as possible. So those are some of the things that we're doing. We know, though, that right now there is a lot of need for information and very little time for people to consume that information. And so it is constantly a balance of pushing out too much information that then isn't read, or too little information and people are yearning for more. So we get feedback on both sides of that coin for sure. So we continue to work on it.
Thank you.
Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, it is. And, I didn't even realize like that you're literally providing information to you're even having to bifurcate it even more to the remote and the hybrid. I mean, that is a lot. Do board members have comments or questions or recommendations on communications?
I have an observation just based on my own behavior. So what I've noticed is that, I get, like probably everyone, I get about 200 emails a day from, work, which is, I got to deal with that, right? And I get another, like, God knows how many hundred and personal emails. But if I get a text, I'll pay attention, and I find that people tend to still treat the text as somewhat sacred territory and only important things go in that. So it's a thought, there's sort of a hierarchy of communication and in person. I can start a whole, lecture on this, but in person matters, and then the phone call, and then, it's like, if you think in terms of, meaningfulness, and then you rank kind of what's important based on that, then I think at least that's how I process communication. So if someone cares enough to pick up the phone, then I will pay attention. If they care enough to write me an email to this, I may pay attention. You know what I'm saying? So
yes, I think it highlights for us the continued need to explore text options.
Yeah.
We hear mixed reviews of texting from families, but I think a couple of our principals were trying out some new things last week, especially at the elementary level, where different things were happening every day, and we're trying to make sure people know what to expect. So we'll continue to explore those text messages as well.
Other board members?
I had a couple of thoughts, and actually it was very, very, very helpful listening to your summary of all of the types of communications that are happening around the district, and I was aware of most of them. The bifurcation of it, I was not. That's a lot. But yeah, I am well aware of how much information is out there. It's just huge, huge quantities. I think what my impression has been, and it's not, this is no way criticism of the work that you guys have done, which has been astounding, the amount of information you have put out. But I think, like what you said, the chunking of the information, there's just so many people out there that just do not, they don't read things, they visualize things, and so it's more like the, picking out the bullet points and the main points of things, and the main dates and the main expectations. I think people are maybe certain groups of people or whatever may be missing a lot of that information. And they'll even admit it. They'll say, you know, I don't have time to go to something on some and search through the website for, you know, through a 90-page document. You know, you hear people complain about that. It's like, okay, well, we've given you all the information, but you don't want to do it that way. Okay, well, but I think when it comes to like stuff like the announcement that Kristen made the other day, which is fantastic. But like the information in there is fantastic, but like the way it comes to people, possibly when it goes out like on Facebook or whatever, a lot of people respond to short visual, you know, in your face messages, sometimes a lot easier to reach people. I think that's been missing, and I know why, because you guys have more important things to do than to deal with that right now. But it's something that it would be nice to strive towards once again, like as things start to calm down. Because it certainly isn't because for a lack of transparency. I mean, the information is all out there. I think it's just that it's just been too much to deal with until now. But it would be nice to get back on track with that as it's possible, to get back on track with really better communications with not just the families in D39, but I think some of the, you know, as simple as sending an email out to the greater constituency. I've read quite a bit of people outside of D39 taxpayers who just are like, what's going on in D39 with my money? You know, how are decisions being made that feel like they haven't been communicated with? And it's as simple as reminding them that they just have to subscribe to our newsletter. And we send that out every year pretty much. And we may have not this year. I don't know if we did. Or
39 Express.
Yeah, they may have, no, but the link to it, like to remind our whole mailing list, like to the greater, you know, Wilmette and part of Glenview, that if they don't have a child in the district, that they can still subscribe to that so they can get the information that they want. That's so simple, like, you know, just to an email blast to remind them that they can subscribe to that for information. So we've always done that in the past, I believe. So there's just easy ways to take care of some of it. And then the last piece was, and I don't know if other board members have felt this way. This has just been my personal feeling, is I have witnessed, Carrie, you and your administration working 24/7 over the top, unbelievably, with, you know, the pace with which you have worked is just mind-boggling. And you, because of the pandemic. And then Lisa, you yourself stepped up unbelievably to match the pace of the pandemic. You were writing letters, you were responding to everything coming in, and then taking on additional responsibilities to try to get through this. And I know each of us, me the least because I was in surgery, but have each taken on some additional responsibilities. But I felt in general that that everything has changed in terms of the way information is shared, because you're going so fast, and this is not typical. So we are not functioning under a typical protocol in any fashion whatsoever. Carrie, you're not functioning under typical protocol. And so I feel like we have to adapt as a board, because the board isn't you, Lisa, the board is all of us together. And I feel like in some ways, and maybe I can just speak for myself, that I'm getting left behind, and I think we all have to be as one, standing as one, moving as one at the same pace, because this has changed as a whole. The way communications, if you're moving at 100 miles an hour, we should all be moving with you because we're your support, we are your backup. And if we're not, if we don't have the same information, I'm not saying that you have to tell us everything you're doing. I'm not, as you do it, because that's not what this is about. But it's, we should be as up to date and up to speed on what has happened after you've made your decisions and stuff, as quickly as possible, so that we are informed and we can help and we can pick up the slack, or we can make a decision or do something. I just feel that the communication has broken down amongst us. It's just a gut feeling. I just feel like there's been a lack of, I guess just a lack of communication. And I feel it would be helpful if we could have a weekly, like, and I know you give us weekly updates, I'm not saying, but if instead of that, there were weekly concerns, or weekly questions for us, or, I mean, there are things you're working on, or things that you take on that are problematic, or, questions or things that are outstanding, that issues that I'd like to know about. Like just in all honesty, like if there's something going on at a school that's a question mark or whatever, it's good for the board to know. I mean, that's at a balcony level, not a dance floor, just to be aware of, so that we can answer questions. I mean, so that's, in a nutshell, what I've been thinking of. John?
Ellen, I think you have a good point as far as how times have changed, and we really haven't changed our board schedule, to sort of meet how quick events are unraveling. And I think, the administration, Lisa, have, leadership has been spectacular, I would say. But yeah, maybe we should have more meetings, especially in this important time of reopening. I mean, that's kind of my translation of where you're headed.
Either that, or I mean, I don't want to be a burden. The biggest thing is I don't want this to come off as something that is more of a burden for the administration and Carrie. I want this to be, I mean, as a team, more helpful. So if you think that this is going to be interfering with the day-to-day business, and then that's not the point. But I think that as a whole working team, like, we're a part of, the bigger picture.
So just a couple thoughts, and Amy, I'll get to you in one second. We do meet every 2 weeks. So we have our board meeting and we have our committee meeting, and it's helpful to know kind of what information we don't have, but I do want to hear from Amy kind of, I'm not sure what we need to change. And so what would be really helpful is really concrete suggestions, but go ahead, Amy.
Well, that's along the lines of what I was going to ask, because I haven't necessarily felt that way. So it would be helpful for me to have some idea of how that's come about, like what examples are, because I have felt I haven't felt that way. And I would worry, I don't know the impact of more frequent meetings. To me, that feels like a big load at an already big time, but I also want to make sure we meet the communication. I felt in the loop and not surprised.
Well, I regardless of my feelings about being in the loop or not, I guess I've been involved with some of the metrics and stuff that gets me a little bit more in the loop. But hearing the concern about not being in the loop, I do think it's important that we all do feel that we're in the loop. But also, so I'm hearing that, and I'm also hearing, but we don't want to put extra load on the administration. So I'm just going to echo Lisa's, hey, maybe we should take on the work of making really concrete what it is that we want. And then if we can get to something, concrete, then I think the administration will be able to say, I suspect, because we all know our administration and our leader, that they will all say, yes, we will do everything possible. This one and this one might be really hard for us. So if you really want it, we'll do it. But, you know, and I think that might be a good way to get to what we actually do.
Just real briefly going forward, I think both of you have mentioned how to make sure that we don't lose track of this. But in retrospect, I mean, this summer we had at least one board meeting and at least 2 committee meetings that we normally wouldn't have had. So we have been meeting more often. Whether that's enough or not is a different topic, but you know, we were meeting about every 2 weeks during the summer, where normally there's a 6 to 8 week period where we don't meet at all. So I think we're at least trying to do that. And we always have to keep reevaluating, but you know, I think the board has been attempting to be more active without overburdening.
Done.
Yeah, I mean, I'm good. I think whenever I have questions, they get, you know, I either call Lisa or I call Carrie, and I get what I need. But it's sympathetic, just given to where Ellen's coming from, because it's, you know, we are headed into, I view, a critical time of having the students back in school. So thinking through like the next couple months, I guess we have a meeting when?
Every 2 weeks.
Yeah, every 2
And then the
weeks.
metrics committee meets every week.
Yeah, yeah.
And then there's other meetings. I just want to also be mindful of the board. We're gonna circulate today the CRC and the foundation meeting. We have weekly emails from Carrie. And one of the things, Ellen, we talked about was maybe expanded Blue Notes, but I still go back to what is it that we're missing so that we can address the issue? Because I do want to make sure that you are, everyone feels.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I just want to say, I want to be responsive, but I'm still not sure what we're trying to solve for.
So I would be willing to sit with Ellen and sort of come up with some concrete suggestions, if that is useful to you, and if other board members think that's reasonable, that would be one way that we could get to a concrete thing. Is that, I don't know, Ellen, what's your thought?
Yeah, I think possibly, you know, we as a board haven't had, like in the past, we have had executive board meetings where we just discussed how to work better as a board. And I feel possibly that we haven't kind of come together, and this is just as a board lately, and we're in the middle of a pandemic. And I feel like it would be really nice to gauge where everyone's heads are and what, you know, instead of having to call someone every, you know, and ask someone, okay, well, what's going on? Like, what are you thinking about? What have you been dealing with? I feel like everyone is kind of in their own space doing their own thing, where we should all be aware of exactly. I just don't feel like we are. I just don't feel like we're functioning all together. Like, I mean, we are, but we're not. Like, we are a wonderful board and I think we're all generally, you know, a united board. But I just feel like we are. Partially because of a pandemic, and we've been apart and then together, and now I just think it's been quite some time since we were communicating all together as a board, as a unit, and I just feel we've lost some of that, and I'd like to get that back somehow. And it may not even involve Carrie per se. It may involve just us figuring out a way of, and you know, without breaking any of the laws of meeting, you know, of figuring out how to better communicate in each of our little areas, you know, that we're relegated to, so that we all are just more solid. And part of it has to do with also, you know, when things get really, really crazy for either Carrie or for you, that you are delegating more, so that you're not just like running a million miles an hour because you just feel you have to, but that suddenly it's like, okay, now, you know, everything's hit the fan, so now I'm going to delegate everything. You know, like, let's all go together running a million miles an hour to deal with this. And we're all prepared. So I guess it's more just, letting you know that we're all here together as a team.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Ellen. I don't really feel overburdened. I try and delegate. I know that many people here have sat on committees and have different goals, but I'm open to feedback, and also I'm hearing that you would like a retreat. Does the rest of the board want to call in in order for us to talk about us as a board, we need to ask, oh my God, I'm spacing on her name. Yeah,
That's,
Dee to come in and help with the retreat. I mean, maybe you and Mark can put
I'm
together.
okay with Mark and I doing it instead of a formal
We
thing.
can't have a meeting without her, though, to talk about us in terms of the rules. It can't be.
Talk about it. Let's go through.
We can just talk about it. Like, yeah, let Mark and I talk about it
Okay.
first, because I don't, once again, I don't want to create like some big thing right now. It's not the.
Okay, so
I don't think it's a huge.
so it sounds like then the two of you will come back and make recommendations.
Yes.
Is there other new business?
I do have some other new business.
Great.
So we have been working with the Park District, as the board is aware, for childcare offerings, both for community at large, also for our staff members, and they have developed a great new program that is available and was accessed quite readily, I think, by our community and a few of our staff members, but we identified that there was still a need, and it was a need that existed beyond which the Park District was able to provide for. That being for the children, the school-age children of our staff, while their own communities are in remote learning. And so we worked through a couple of things with the Park District. They still have their program available, but it filled up. And so I asked if they were able to do anything special just for our staff. They weren't able to meet that need and said, go ahead, see what else you might be able to find. So we partnered with Right at School, which is another organization that does some after-school programming. In fact, I think they do the after-school programming in Winnetka. And so we now are in conversations with them to open a classroom or two for the children of our staff who may need childcare. Again, our aim is to keep our staff working so that we can keep our schools open. And we recognize that sometimes a barrier might be childcare. So we're really excited about this. We've been working feverishly to both find a location and ensure that the costs are reasonable enough for our staff to be able to use this service. So we're about ready to enter into this agreement with Right at School, and Regina next door has indicated that they have 2 classroom spaces they can make available for this kind of a program. So we're really excited about this. Our staff will need to register and pay for the program, but making another option available to them, we think will be a huge benefit for our staff. So I'm excited about this as well. We're hoping that it will open possibly as early as next week. We have to get to a critical threshold before Right at School can actually open the program, but they're in the process of staffing, of making sure the facility is situated, and so we're really eager to get this going. Just wanted to make the board aware because it is a little different than the Park District programming that we have benefited from so much in the past and currently are continuing to benefit from. There's just lots of needs that exist, and so we're eager to start this additional program.
Well, kudos to you and your team for coming up with a solution. That's terrific. No small feat, I'm sure.
Just real quick. So we're facilitating that the 2 parties can meet together, but we have no ownership, i.e. no insurance issues.
Right. So we are partnering with them. There is not, it won't be on our site. So that kind of sets aside some of those legalities, but we will be reviewing just as oversight. They provide the background checks to us. We are partnering with them to make sure the hours meet our staff needs and those kinds of things. So I will share with the board the contract arrangement that is in place to allow us to kind of partner. So I am kind of acting as the intermediary here between our staff, between Right at School, and between the physical location, which at this point we've identified. We were hoping to host in our schools, but as you all know, all of our classroom spaces are taken up with both our in-person learners and our remote teachers who are teaching remotely from our schools to our remote only students. And so We weren't able to find a location on site, but Regina was so kind to offer some of their classroom space. So I will share that, that document with the team. We just finalized it this morning, I think, so, yeah. Mhm.
So the analogy is almost like employer-sponsored daycare.
Employer mediated probably is a
All
better
right,
way to put
all
it,
right.
because we were able to get the cost reduced by partnering in making sure that there were going to be enough registrants and the facilities and arranging everything. It's really a very reasonable price for our employees, but our employees are actually registering their own children as they see fit and paying for it themselves. Mhm.
Other new business? Okay, then it is time for public comment. The district has requested the public comments be emailed to publiccomment@wilmette39.org. Tony, have we received any public comments via email?
Yeah, we have 4 of them.
Great.
First one is from Cindy Levine and Wendy Zunn, co-presidents of the League of Women Voters, Wilmette. They asked that we read a statement. It's regarding the importance of civil discourse. As a nation and as a community, we are living through disruptive and chaotic times to a degree many of us have not experienced in our lifetimes. We are dealing with a global pandemic that has upended how we work, live, socialize, and educate our children. In the midst of this, we are also recognizing inequities that have exacerbated the impact of the epidemic on the minority communities and those already most vulnerable. Furthering the strain on our collective consciousness is civil unrest catalyzed by the brutal police killing of George Floyd, which has heightened public awareness of the systematic racism and implicit bias of our criminal justice system and prompted reflection across all of our governing body's policies. Now more than ever, we need to come together as a community to communicate with each other respectfully, to engage in a dialogue, to really hear and understand different perspectives, and to collaborate to develop solutions that can serve the needs of our community and our goal of becoming more inclusive. Discussion and factual debate about issues facing our community is absolutely appropriate and important, but disrespectful accusations or comments impugning a lack of integrity as have increasingly been posted online and in communications to local government leaders are rarely appropriate but almost always harmful to the very system that we depend on. We are fortunate in Wilmette to be led by thoughtful and committed individuals in leadership roles across our governing bodies, including elected and appointed officials as well as dedicated staff. Each board is working to reconfigure core programs and address significant financial issues, often without complete information. They're all making difficult decisions of tremendous import, which impact the people's health, safety, and livelihood. These community leaders deserve our gratitude and respect, even when we disagree with their opinions and actions. At the same time, individuals and families are under tremendous stress as they seek to protect their family, continue to make a living, and educate their children. Fellow community members also deserve compassion and empathy. As our leaders continue to make difficult decisions as we head into the final months leading up to the November general election and move from there into our own municipal elections, we encourage everyone to approach discussions and debates with mutual respect to ensure that qualified individuals are positively disposed to consider volunteering their time to serve in office. Let us try to reflect on how we conduct ourselves online and in our communication to government leaders and recommit ourselves to exemplifying the best of our democratic process. Let us not sink to the lows that we may see in politics elsewhere in our state and our country. Let us be role models for our children. And finally, let us agree to respect not only each other's opinions, but more importantly, each other's integrity. At the end of the day, we are all neighbors and in this incredibly special village. Next one is from Nora Kropp, a mother of 2 District 39 children. Board of Education members, thank you so much for your continued commitment to our students, schools, and larger community. I can imagine this must be a very stressful time for everyone planning and responsible for decision-making for the upcoming school year. I'm reaching out to vocalize my support of our wonderful District 39 staff and teachers who have worked tirelessly to pivot as we see COVID landscape change around us. Our teachers and staff are the reason many of us have chosen this community to raise our children. Our teachers and staff are the reason our schools are award-winning schools. My sister is a paraprofessional at one of the District 39 schools, and I fear for her health, as so does my entire family. In solidarity with teachers and staff of District 39, we have chosen to use the remote learning option to bring down the number of people in District 39 buildings at one time. I would love to see a discussion about full remote learning in District 39 with reserved in-person instruction for kids with IEPs and children of essential workers. I hope that District 39 will continue to be a place that cultivates and values the strong partnership that it has with its teachers, teachers union, and parent community. Thank you for your time and continued effort. This one's from Robin Cook. First and foremost, I am so greatly appreciative of the fact that our kids have been able to get back into school. My 7th grader, who typically sleeps to 11, was up before 6:45 on Tuesday morning as she was so excited to get back into school. It was a great day, according to her. We are fortunate that the teachers, administration, and the board have figured out how to get the kids in class learning. Let us applaud that this occurred, and let us hope that this will continue. However, the home portion of the hybrid learning does not seem to be living up to expectations. Maybe I had wrongly assumed that this would be live streamed as New Trier is doing, but both of my kids have seemed to have less work than even in the spring. My 8th grade son actually asked if he could come to work to make some cash with me, as he's expecting to complete it by 10 a.m. at the latest on these days. And to be honest, if it's 12 or 1, that's still not okay. My daughter was a little longer, but still done even earlier than that last year. This cannot be the best we can do in our district. I'm advocating for a live stream as a standard rather than asynchronous learning. This should be feasible with some investment, create less work for our teachers, and improve the overall learning and engagement for students. It also will allow the district resources classrooms to be better utilized. I've heard rumblings that there is concern with privacy, but my guess is that this should be able to be figured out, considering it's being done at other schools. And if it's due to a few kids whose parents don't want their pictures on video, my guess is again that they do not have to be in the video, and this feels like a small group. If you cannot do it live streaming, not sure why, there should be some other creative way to have kids taught when at home, when ECA is doing it. My guess is that there are other ways to teach the kids. And in the end, we should not have our kids learning on their own for 2 to 3 days a week. I understood this in the spring based on the situation, but not now. I'm not sure how that would be good for them unless we consider an abundance of free time and self-directed learning as the gold standard. Please consider something else rather than this current plan. We can do better than this. I think our district does very well during normal times and holds itself to a high standard, but the true sign of a great district is when we can do well in hard times. Last comment, Joy, no last name given. As we head into our 3rd week of hybrid learning, I'm incredibly concerned about the level of preparation and learning on asynchronous days for 8th grade. Based on an earlier communication, my expectation was that teaching would be live streamed on the days not in school. Come to find that there is no live streaming, but the expectation is for self-directed learning with limited to no teaching engagement. Last spring, my son was done with remote learning by 9:30 a.m. I did not voice my concerns about that as the pandemic was new and no one was prepared to deal with such a massive upheaval in learning. However, I expected that the summer would be spent in preparation for our new reality. That does not appear to be the case. We discovered that asynchronous days would be much like learning in the spring, self-directed. That simply isn't good enough. For an 8th grader to be completely done with work and he's an A student by 9:30 a.m. means there isn't enough teaching and learning happening. If the high school can figure out remote learning, why can't we? And if preschools and elementary schools can figure out how to have in-person learning, including non-silent lunches and time with friends outdoors, why can't we? I'm incredibly disappointed and deeply concerned. I do understand that this is an incredible and unprecedented time in learning and know how difficult managing through this is. However, as this appears to be our new normal, I look to you to not just get by, but provide unparalleled learning experience we expect from the Wilmette Public School System. I look forward to hearing from you. That's all.
Great, thank you. May I seek a motion to adjourn to executive session?
I move to adjourn to executive session to discuss negotiations, special education, and personnel.
Lisa, I just have a question. There is another action item on there. Maybe we don't need it, but on mine it says action regarding reopening plan. I don't know what that is, but.
All right, Mark.
Okay. Back item 9.
Oh, you're right.
I don't know what it is. I just don't want to skip it if it's important.
I think that was originally included in case there was action related to the metrics reopening advisory team. The team, as you know, did not make any recommendations to revise the plan, and so there is not an action item to pursue at this
No
moment.
problem.
So
In that
thank you.
case, I will second the motion to
Thank you.
adjourn to executive
No,
session.
but thank you, Mark. Good catch. Motion having been made and seconded, will the clerk please call the roll?
Yes.
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 Yes. We are adjourned to executive session and the time is 11:15. Do we need another 5 minutes?